Chapter 28. A dragon disciple was a typical example of a warlock. Over time, they would automatically awaken their dragon-related innate abilities, as well as many related spells. Finally, they would strengthen their dragon-related bloodline and replace their original human bloodline, eventually becoming a more powerful half-dragon. Therefore, the dragons were often regarded as the source of the sorcerer's inheritance because they didn't need to learn anything. From birth, a lot of knowledge and memories were stored in their minds. As long as their strength increased, they would gradually awaken all kinds of memory spells and related knowledge from when they were young. This was a very powerful point. The genetic characteristics of dragons had always been a secret that many wizards wanted to study because if they succeeded, they could also use it to cultivate their descendants, allowing their descendants to awaken related hereditary memories over time. Soren even received a similar quest in the north. The target of the quest was an adult white dragon. Now that it was confirmed that Vivian had the talent of a warlock, a new question arose. How much is her innate charm? Normally, a warlock's innate talent would be stronger the earlier they awakened. Under normal circumstances, they would only awaken around puberty, 13 years old. Such a warlock would usually have around 16 points of charm. Basically, it was very difficult to find a warlock with less than 15 points of charm. When a warlock awakened their innate talent, it meant that their own affinity had begun to affect the surrounding energy. Following some special events, their emotions would fluctuate greatly, and they would awaken their first level 0 spell. At the same time, they would also have the ability to control external energy. It was more complicated. Just like a newborn dragon in the dragon clan, it had to wait until it grew into a young dragon, 30 to 50 years old, before it could awaken its innate talent and master its first draconic spell. It was the same for a warlock. They could only awaken their first level 0 spell when they were young. Therefore, every time this happened, it meant that the warlock's innate talent was higher. The rough conversion was that for every year of awakening, the base charm would increase by 1 point. In other words, if a 13-year-old awakened sorcerer had 16 points of charm, a 12-year-old awakened sorcerer would have 17 points of charm and an 11-year-old awakened sorcerer would have 18 points of charm. Vivian was now 8 years old. Her innate talent should be around 20 to 21 points of charm. How is this possible? Soren was shocked beyond words. He murmured, "Doesn't that mean he's a natural-born divine warlock? It's even possible for me to become a heavenly fate warlock in the future." How much was it? Soren had a troubled look on his face, as if he was troubled by the fact that he couldn't determine Vivian's attributes. Attributes were a very important factor in a person's strength. Only when one's attributes were high enough would they be able to gain more power when leveling up their profession. Therefore, in many cases, the starting point would affect the ending point. Before possessing a demigod divinity or mastering divinity, +1 to all attributes, a professional's strength after entering the realm of legends was largely determined by their basic attributes in the early stages. Because at that time, one of your attributes must reach 25 points, and if possible, your second attribute must also reach 25 points. Damn it! Why don't you have the scouting ability you used to have? Soren rubbed his head in distress. In the past, players all had the scouting ability, which allowed them to check other people's attributes. Although it was based on the level of the skill, it was enough for him to determine Vivian's innate attributes. But now, it seemed that there was no one else in the world who had attributes other than him, so naturally, there was no possibility of scouting. However, at this moment, a row of data suddenly appeared, scouting ability activated. Do you want to perform data analysis on target? Pay 300 soul energy, slaughter EXP. You can perform data analysis on target's basic attributes. More data analysis will consume more soul energy. 300 slaughter EXP? Wasn't this price a bit too high? But after looking at Vivian's confused expression, Soren gritted his teeth and chose to pay. It was only 300 slaughter EXP, at most. He could earn it back by killing a few gnolls. But he still had to figure out Vivian's innate attributes, because she might have an even more amazing talent than Soren. Soren was born with 18 dexterity, +1 acquired training ability, 17 intelligence, plus 1 acquired training ability. Begin data analysis. Soren's vision suddenly turned black, and a pain appeared in his head. Then, numerous zeros and ones began to jump in his mind. This feeling was like lying in bed for more than half a month, and when he woke up, there were countless streams of data, and he couldn't move his body at all. Even the slightest movement would cause a strong surge of electricity to rush through his body. A row of data appeared. Data analysis successful. Consumed 300 soul energy. Target's data is as follows. Name, Vivian. Race, human. Age, 8 years old. Attributes, Strength 5, Dexterity 9, Vitality 6, Intelligence 16, Wisdom 18, Charm 21. Others, unknown. Target is still a child. Main attributes, Strength, Vitality, Dexterity, will increase greatly as time passes. Secondary attributes, Wisdom, Charm, will increase slightly as time passes. Basic attributes will stop increasing after reaching adulthood. 21 Charm. It was even higher than Soren's expectation of 20 Charm. At the same time, Vivian also had 18 Wisdom. No wonder the priestess of the Dawn Lord said that she had an extraordinary talent, and that she could become a priestess. Wasn't that nonsense? With 18 Wisdom, becoming a priestess would be as easy as eating and drinking. Big brother? The little girl seemed to have noticed the pain on Soren's face. She immediately grabbed his hand and asked anxiously, "What's wrong? Are you feeling uncomfortable again?" The streams of data in front of Soren's eyes gradually disappeared. Maybe it was because he had seen too many zeros and ones, but now he was more or less used to it. He smiled and patted Vivian's head. "I'm fine. But my Vivian will become a legend when she grows up. She might even become a beauty that can cause the downfall of a city." He had 21 points of natural charm, 18 perceptive sense, 16 points of innate intelligence. These were only the attributes of a child. According to Soren's past experience, after reaching adulthood, the main attribute would increase by more than 5 points, and the secondary attribute would increase by 1 to 3 points. In other words, even if Vivian didn't do anything, she could easily become a spellcaster in the future. At the same time, she would have an extraordinary talent. No matter what spellcaster, as long as she was willing, whether it was a wizard, a priest, a warlock, a droll, or a shaman, she could become a spellcaster. Her talent was so much better than Soren's. The little girl still didn't fully understand Soren's words, but it didn't stop her from smiling happily. "Big brother. Are you saying that I'm beautiful?" At the same time, in a hidden underground chamber in Amber City, the blue flame on the altar suddenly flickered, and then a dark figure appeared in the middle of the altar. His figure seemed to have swallowed the light. Although the flame shone on his body, nothing could be seen. It was just a pure shadow of darkness. "Your Excellency." The fallen followers guarding the altar knelt down on one knee. The red-robed priest bowed and said, "Why have you come in person? Has the Lord given a new oracle?" The dark figure on the altar wasn't a physical body. It looked more like a projection of some kind of energy. He looked down coldly and said in a deep voice, "The first Son of God has awakened." There was an accident in the prophecy. The Lord's will did not descend upon the Son of God. The first Son of God awakened his own divine power. "Pass down my orders. Find him at all costs. Awaken the sleeping knights of terror. Send them out. Crush all the ants that stand in our way. I want to see the first Son of God return to his original path and wake up completely in despair and fear." The dark figure gradually disappeared. The red-robed priest's face showed a hint of madness. He licked his lips and looked at the 8 marble coffins around the altar. There were countless complicated patterns engraved on them, like a powerful seal. He glanced at the bottom of the altar with a cruel gaze and grinned. "Now, go and find enough sacrifices. The ritual to awaken the Knights of Terror will be held at midnight tomorrow. This city would be destroyed before the dawn arrived. Fear will be everywhere." Chapter 29. The night passed quickly. When Soren woke up and was about to bring Vivian to buy a mount, he noticed that there were many more guards in Amber City than before. Even the 9th Division, which had been stationed near the Black Boar Forest, had been called back. This was the best division in Amber City. There were 126 of them in total, and most of them were warriors with professions above level 8. There were also a few rangers, priests, and barbarians. They were all middle-grade professions, and any one of them could easily wipe out a guild. Among Amber City's 1,200-strong standing army, they were one of the best elite troops in the city. What's going on? Soren picked up Vivian and looked at the panicked crowd. He frowned and asked, "Did something happen again?" At that moment, a dark-skinned young man suddenly shouted from afar. "Hey!" He quickly pushed through the crowd and ran to Soren, panting, "I finally found you. Luckily, I heard that you wanted to buy a mount yesterday, so I waited at the mule market. Otherwise, you would have missed it. Don't ask. Follow me. I'll tell you more on the way." The young man in front of Soren looked familiar. He remembered that he was one of the people he met in the caravan when he was looking for the Whiterun caravan. He seemed to be the servant of the owner of the caravan. Why was he waiting for him here? Weren't they supposed to leave tomorrow? Did they change their mind? What's going on? Soren thought for a while and asked, "Why are you waiting for us here?" "The owner is leaving." The dark-skinned young man pushed through the crowd and quickly said, "The owner said he was leaving early this morning, and the manager was sent to sell the goods. The owner still remembered the promise, so he sent me here early in the morning. The caravan is leaving at noon today. Let's go. It's over there." The tanned young man led Soren through several turns and soon arrived at the north gate of Amber City. There were already a lot of people gathered there, and there were also dozens of large carriages parked around. A group of fully armed guards were scattered around. They had been following the caravan for more than 3 months, and they were all from the merchants' hometowns. This was a typical caravan from the north, but there was something special about it. Their leader was a woman from Tanara. Descendants of witches. Soren could hear the complaints of some of the merchants in the north. They were basically saying that they didn't earn the money they were supposed to earn by selling their goods in such a hurry. They might even lose a lot of money. However, although these merchants said so, they still ordered their workers to move the goods down. The northern witches had a very high reputation. In the eyes of the Northlanders, they were incomparably noble. Not only were they powerful and mysterious, but they also had the ability to predict the future. "It's here." The dark-skinned young man stopped and took a deep breath. "The caravan will set off at noon today. I'll bring you here to see the place. There's still half a day before we leave. If you want to come with us, you should go and prepare your things now. If you want to wait until tomorrow, my master said that you can go to Butler Foddery. He will refund you the deposit. Leave now?" Soren couldn't help but frown. He thought to himself, could it be that the witches also foresaw that the skinning incident would escalate? But why the hurry? It's only a day's time. Could it be that there's going to be a major change within a day? Let's not think too much about it. It's better to be safe than sorry. So what if it's a day earlier? Soren immediately nodded and carried Vivian's petite body on his back. He said in a deep voice, "I'll go back to get my things and meet you at noon." "Okay." The tanned young man nodded and said seriously, "Then you better come early. My master always means what he says. If you're late, the caravan won't wait for you." Soren nodded and carried Vivian back to the slums. There was still some time before noon, so he could still go back to get his things. However, he didn't have much time to choose a mount. Soren could only raise the price to 20 Kindler coins and buy a strong traveling horse from other caravan merchants. On the other side, there was a large carriage in the middle of the caravan. A typical Northland merchant with a big beard walked into the carriage respectfully and knelt on the ground. "Master, we've sold all the goods. But because of the tight schedule, we've only earned less than 30% of our original profit. At the same time, we won't have enough time to purchase the goods. We'll lose even more profit at the next stop. The merchants below are complaining. There was a gauze curtain in the carriage. It was very spacious inside, and there was enough room for a table. There were exquisite carpets and fabrics on all sides, and there were strange patterns on the walls. He could vaguely see the figure of a beautiful woman. She was lying lazily on the couch with a thin veil on her face. Her blue eyes were focused in front of him. It was a card that was pinched between her fingers. On the back of the card, there was a mysterious magic pattern that looked like a whirlpool. I can smell the scent of death. The mysterious woman threw away the card and casually picked up a deck of tarot cards. On the card was a ferocious skeleton knight. She coldly said, if anyone wants to stay, they can leave the caravan on their own. Otherwise, tell them to shut up. The bearded merchant nodded and got up from the floor. He said respectfully, I'll tell them your order. A tired sigh sounded. The mysterious woman lay lazily on the long table. She held her head with one hand and pondered. She waved her hand and said, you may leave. Tell them not to stay. Walk until the moon is high in the sky, then find a place with water to set up camp. A respectful response came from outside. The bearded merchant passed the message to the leader of the caravan guards. Then, the leader nodded with a serious expression and began to order the other guards to prepare the things. If they didn't stop on the road, everyone would have to bring food. This was a rare situation because the caravan would rest after walking for a while. If they kept walking, even the cows and horses that pulled the caravan wouldn't be able to take it. They would be exhausted the next day, and they might even die from exhaustion. This order was only given to them under special circumstances. Walking from noon until the moon was high in the sky for 12 hours without stopping was not a simple task. Soren immediately returned to the slums. He packed up his things and brought Vivian to the horse market. He was going to buy a traveling horse at a 30% higher price. Originally, he planned to say goodbye to the priestess at the Dawn Temple, but things happened so suddenly that he didn't have time to think about it. He only hoped that they would meet again in the future. Soren didn't have much time, from packing his things to buying a traveling horse. He arrived just before the caravan set off at noon. A bearded manager of the caravan told him a few words and then ordered the others to set off. The manager's words were simple. The caravan would go all out today and wouldn't stop until the moon was high in the sky. If they couldn't keep up with the caravan, they would be arranged to sit on a large cart. Many of the caravan's goods were sold off at a cheaper price. There was even a merchant from the northern lands who complained that he had only received 2/3 of the price for the goods that he had sold at a reduced price. If they left in such a hurry, they wouldn't even receive 1/3 of the goods. No one cared about him. When the time was up, the entire caravan started to move quickly. The workers climbed onto the caravan and began to drive the cows and horses forward. The guards of the caravan had already started to lead the way. Their job wasn't simply to follow the caravan. Only experienced adventurers were qualified to be the guards of the caravan because they acted as scouts to some extent when traveling in the wild. They would check if there were any monsters nearby, if there was any danger, if there was a need to change the route, if the caravan could pass through, if the caravan needed to be cleaned up in advance, if there were any holes in the road that would affect the caravan's progress, and so on. These tasks were all done by the guards of the caravan. They simply followed the caravan and waited for enemies to surround them before drawing their swords to cut them down. That was a scene from a third-rate story. It was purely to set off the main characters who wanted to show off their skills. That was why the guards of the caravan were written in such a way. They had to travel in the wild all year round. Even if they were an idiot, as long as they could survive, they would be trained to be an expert. The level of the guards of the caravan wasn't low. P.S. Let's fight for the first place tomorrow. What do you guys think? Chapter 30. Amber City, Garrison Force. A heavy warrior in full armor hurriedly walked into the room and said to the two people who were arguing, "Not good. Sir Collis. More than 10 people went missing last night. It seems like it was done by the fallen. The argument in the room stopped abruptly. Sir Collis, who represented the noble forces, was a man in his 40s with a thick beard. He had participated in the war in the north. He looked up with bloodshot eyes and said angrily, "What? More people went missing? You bunch of trash. It's been 5 days, and you still haven't found the nest of those rats. What does the council pay you for?" Opposite him was a knight with a solemn face. After hearing these words, he immediately stopped him and said in a deep voice, "Now is not the time to talk about this. The noble council must delegate its authority. The seriousness of this matter has exceeded the scope of the secular world. It must be handed over to the church in the city to deal with. I'll contact the Hand of Justice now and ask them to send out paladins to conduct a large-scale investigation." "Are we really going to send out the paladins?" Sir Collis' face showed a hint of hesitation. Paladins were stubborn people who could not tolerate sand in their eyes. Once they were sent out, it would mean a large-scale, detect evil, incident would happen. Not many nobles in Amber City were clean. Many gray areas were controlled by the nobles. Once the paladins were sent out, it would mean that Amber City would be cleansed. Not only would the evil fallen be found, but the paladins would also be found. Many of the gray areas controlled by the nobles in the city would also be cleansed by the paladins. By then, the strength of the nobles would be greatly reduced. At the same time, the influence of the church in the city would be greatly increased. Most of the time, unless there was no other way, the nobles would try their best to suppress the church's influence. Pantheon and fanatics were two extremes. If the paladins were sent out, the gray areas of Amber City would be swept clean. At that time, he would offend many nobles. Smuggling, prostitution, slavery, black market. Which one of the gangs that controlled these gray interests wasn't supported by an aristocrat? No. Sir Collis gritted his teeth and retorted, "The 9th Division has been transferred back. We still have plenty of energy. I'll go look for His Excellency the City Lord now and fight for the highest level of search authority. I'll definitely find those hateful rats today." The highest level of search authority. This meant that they could also enter the homes of the nobles to search. After not finding any clues for so long, he was already suspecting that one of the nobles had fallen into the dark realm. "All right then." The solemn temple knight nodded and said in a serious voice, "Go and apply now. If you don't get it before dark, then I will work with the church in the city to deal with it. With so many people disappearing, I suspect that they are preparing for some evil sacrificial ceremony." Outside Amber City. It had been 3 hours since Soren left. The caravan left as soon as they said they would, without any delay. He rode behind the caravan on a traveling horse, and Vivian sat in front of him. The little girl was almost weightless, and the traveling horse could easily bear the weight of the two of them. In the beginning, there were large tracts of farmland outside Amber City. There were dozens of villages and towns around Amber City, and all the resources needed by the city were transported from here. Donkey carts, ox carts, and bucket carts could be seen on the road. Farmers and small merchants were sending the goods they needed the next day to the city in advance. However, as they got further away from Amber City, the number of farmlands began to thin out, and large patches of wild forests began to appear in their sights. Occasionally, there were also small villages with few people. The further away they were from the city, the more danger they would encounter. These small villages relied on their own militia to protect them, and very few guards from Amber City would come to clean up the nearby monsters. Unless they took the initiative to ask for help or persuaded their lord to help them. When they first left Amber City, the road was more than 10 meters wide, but now it had shrunk to 5 or 6 meters. The road had also become bumpy. Because it had rained some time ago, the road was very muddy. Sometimes, when large carts were passing through, they needed people to push them over. The caravan guards were already in full operation. Some of the guards were scattered around on horseback, some began to check the situation of the road ahead, and some began to investigate the nearby environment. After they were 30 kilometers away from Amber City, they were considered to have entered the range of wild creatures. Soren was very quiet along the way. Vivian was also very obedient today. She did not make any noise along the way, and only curiously looked around with her big eyes. If there was anything she did not understand, she would ask Soren. The caravan did not pay much attention to this follower of theirs. The merchants were all busy with their own matters. The mysterious owner of the caravan did not show up either. The people in charge of the caravan were her 3 stewards. This was a large-scale caravan. Just the guards alone numbered more than 30. If the workers, servants, and slaves were included, there were more than 100 people in the caravan. This was a relatively common formation in the north. The ordinary merchants who were affiliated with the owner of the caravan had to organize their own carriages, manpower, and goods. They would then seek protection from the owner of the caravan during the journey, and after completing the journey, they would have to give 1/3 of their profits to the owner of the caravan. The mysterious descendant of the northern witches. The sound of horses galloping could be heard. The leader of the caravan's guards rode his horse to Soren's side. The view of the surroundings was much worse than before. The dense grass and trees hindered their vision, and there were barely any people around. A wanderer? The leader of the guards looked at Soren and said in a deep voice, "There's a situation up ahead. Come with me and take a look." Vivian nervously reached out and grabbed Soren's sleeve, but he comforted her by patting her shoulder and said, "I have to take care of my sister. Look. She's still young. She can't ride a horse by herself." As soon as Soren finished speaking, the curtain of the carriage in the middle of the caravan was suddenly lifted, and a beautiful woman with a veil poked her head out. She glanced at Vivian, who was not far away, and a smile appeared on her face. She said gently, "This little girl can come to me. It's very comfortable and safe inside the carriage." Soren hesitated for a moment, then looked down at Vivian. The little girl tilted her head and thought for a moment, then nodded and said, "Okay. I like that big sister. She's not a bad person." Vivian's wisdom was as high as 18 points, which meant that her intuition was very good. Soren thought for a moment, then nodded and said, "That's good. You go to the carriage first, I'll go with them and take a look." Wanderer. This was the official title of a thief. They were the golden fingers of a profession, and they were involved in almost all fields. In the wilderness, a wanderer's detection ability was second only to a ranger's wilderness survival talent. The two quickly spurred their horses and rushed to the place where the situation was. The caravan's speed slowed down a little, and they only sped up after the guards confirmed that it was safe. "Leader. You're finally here." Soren turned around a mountain road, and the forest in front became more luxuriant. Not far away, there were 3 caravan guards, all of whom were experienced and steady close combat professions. One of the guards, who had obvious northern characteristics, squatted down, pointed at the footprints on the ground, and said to the 2 of them, "Look. These are the footprints of goblins. Judging from the number, there are dozens of them, and there may be a natural warlock among them. These annoying things can't be killed no matter what. It's solved this year. Next year, they'll give birth to a big nest again." Goblins' growth cycle was very short, and their survival ability was very tenacious. They could survive even if they ate grass. They were like weeds in the wild. After a batch was cleared, another batch would immediately emerge. It's really goblins. Soren glanced at the footprints left behind near the road. Some of them had been washed away by the rain, but he could still calculate the approximate number. However, the goblins wouldn't dare to attack the caravan. According to Soren's understanding of the goblins, these cowardly creatures would only dare to attack when their numbers were 5 to 10 times more than the enemy's. Any 5-man adventurer team would be able to deal with them. As if he saw the doubt on Soren's face, another caravan guard pushed aside the grass beside him and said in a low voice, "That's not the key. Look here." It was an area that was obviously different. The soil was very fresh, as if it had been dug up. The area was about 5 feet wide. There were bloodstains within 5 meters of it. Even if it had been washed away by the rain, it could still be seen. Clearly, these goblins encountered something. The leader of the caravan guards grabbed a handful of soil and sniffed it, then said in a low voice, "This thing is not small, and it's very dangerous. The goblins can't hurt it at all." Soren's expression also became serious. He pushed the others aside and walked over. He pulled out his curved sword and stirred the soft soil, then frowned and said, "Burrowers? If it's really these things, then we're in trouble. They live in groups." Chapter 31. Ankegs. They were insect-type monsters that lived in the south. They were about 5 feet wide, 5 meters, and could reach up to 30 feet, 10 meters, in length. They had the ability to sense vibrations and could detect slight vibrations within a range of 60 feet. Ankegs had a pair of giant jaws that could break trees and bite their prey. They could also produce strong acid that could corrode their enemies. They looked like giant insects with 6 to 12 slender legs with sharp claws. At the same time, the Ankegs could also unleash a lethal acid spray attack on the enemy. If the enemy was not immune to the acid, they would die on the spot. Even if they were lucky enough to survive, they would be severely corroded. However, that was not the worst part. What was even more deadly was that the Ankegs were small social creatures. Most Ankegs moved in groups of 2 to 5. They liked to eat fresh meat, but they were also scavengers. They tended to be neutral and would not attack unless they were hunting. However, if they thought you were food, you would be in great danger. There were not many Ankegs in the south. They were mainly active in the southern region and only lived in a specific geographical environment. Generally, unless something happened, they would rarely leave their area of activity. There were almost no Ankegs in the north because they liked soft and moist soil. The soil in the north was too hard due to the cold, making it unsuitable for Ankegs. Creature trait. That was why the caravan guards were unable to identify the Ankegs. "Let's leave this place first." Soren looked around and said, "These monsters will hide underground. It's hard for us to find them. Everyone, stay together. The Ankegs can sense our footsteps. They like to attack lone prey." A message appeared in Soren's mind. It was the challenge information of the Ankegs. Ankeg, Swarm, Grade 3. Challenge rating, Level 8, Monster Level, 10, Strong Acid Spray Ability. Highest and lowest attributes, 20 and 10, Total Attribute Points, 80 to 90. Specialty, Strong Acid Spray, Corrosive Damage, Bite Attack. Difficulty, B+. The challenge rating of the Ankegs was higher than the snake demons because they could appear and disappear unpredictably. They could burrow underground and appear in groups. He used to be a professional assassin for many adventurers. If it was a small adventurer team, once they were attacked, just the first round of strong acid spray would kill the team members. Dealing with this kind of bug required a very strong detection and eavesdropping ability. Otherwise, you'll need the wilderness survival skill to determine their location. Only then can you avoid being ambushed. Soren retreated cautiously. The others also seemed to realize the seriousness of the situation. They pulled out their weapons and retreated outside. Ankegs. Aren't they rarely seen? Could it be that the Ankegs have gone berserk? Soren asked himself as he carefully observed his surroundings and focused his attention on the movements underground. Damn it. Although I've killed these insects before, I really didn't notice when they went berserk. And who was the one who completed the mission? It happened around the same time. Many major events happened in this world, including the skinning incident, the War of the Children of God, the ancient red dragon, the giant migration, and so on. Therefore, Soren did not have the energy to pay attention to something as trivial as the Ankegs going berserk. If the major events that happened in the past were to be ranked, the skinning incident would be ranked B, the War of the Children of God would be ranked A+, and the birth of the ancient red dragon would be ranked A+. As for the Ankegs going berserk, they were not even ranked E+. Unless such an event happened to happen around him, it would be convenient for him to investigate and complete the mission. Otherwise, very few people would pay attention to them. However, Ankags were a very rare insect species. While they were dangerous, they were also very valuable. This was because their shells were extremely sturdy and light. If a skilled blacksmith could be hired, the shells of the Ankags could be forged into a full-body armor that weighed only a third of a full-body armor. In many places, an Ankag armor like this could be sold for up to 3,000 Kindler coins. Even if the materials were sold, they could be sold for 600 to 800 Kindler coins. However, only skilled blacksmiths would buy them, and others would not have any use for them. The shell of an Ankag could only be made with a special enchantment method, and the size of the armor was custom-made. Therefore, if one could not find a skilled blacksmith, the only way was to remove the head of the Ankag. It was a natural +1 shield with decent defense and strong acid resistance. If one could kill an Ankag, the reward would be even higher than killing a Naga demon. Hiss! Suddenly, a strange sound came from the ground. When Soren and the others retreated, they saw a huge bulge in the grass beside the road. Then, a ferocious-looking gigantic Ankag crawled out from the ground. It opened its mouth and pounced on a horse, biting off its head in an instant. Large amounts of blood gushed out, and the only thing left on the ground was a dead horse with its head separated from its body. What a powerful bite! Soren's pupils shrunk, and he quickly hid behind a large tree. Ankags had the ability to spray acid once a day, and it was a killing move for low-level professions. Its power was equivalent to a spell, Acid Arrow. The other guards also took cover, and at the same time, they took out their crossbows and fired at the Ankag. "Cover me!" The guard captain let out a roar and suddenly pulled out the long sword on his back. His figure also grew a little bigger. Blue veins like earthworms appeared on his thick and solid arms, and his skin was flushed red because of excessive blood flow. Following his roar, another guard rolled on the ground and took out a small round shield in front of his chest. At the same time, he loaded a special crossbow bolt into the shield. Berserk? Soren's eyes narrowed, and he muttered, "Northern barbarians?" Boom! There was a slight explosion as the bolt hit the Ankag's body. The Ankag immediately turned its head to face the caravan guard. Ding ding dang dang. Apart from the exploding bolt, the rest of the bolts bounced off the Ankag's carapace. Only a small portion of the bolts managed to land on the Ankag's carapace. As mentioned before, the Ankag's carapace was equivalent to a full-body armor, so its frontal defense was also on the same level as a full-body armor. Normal crossbows had no effect on it at all. Only when the bolts hit its vitals would it be effective. Acid spray. The Ankag spat out a thick, dark green liquid. The guard rolled on the ground to avoid it, but some of it still landed on him. The small round shield in the guard's hand was easily corroded, and the acid that splashed on his arm quickly corroded his leather armor. His flesh also began to smoke. The guard screamed in pain, gritted his teeth, and pulled out his weapon to cut off a piece of flesh from his shoulder. Heavy slash. The guard captain's eyes gradually turned red, and his bones began to crackle. He held his long sword with both hands and leaped 5 meters into the air before slashing at the Ankag's head. Clang! The sound of metal colliding could be heard. The Ankag screamed in pain as it shook its head and rammed into the guard captain. The guard captain twisted his body to avoid the fangs and stabbed behind him with his sword. The guard captain's weak skin was penetrated, and a dark green liquid gushed out from the wound. A Tier 3 warrior, Northern barbarian. Soren did not expect the guard captain to be above LV-10. He spun around with his scimitar, then rolled out from behind the tree and ran past the Ankag from the side. The Ankag had already used its acid spray, which greatly reduced the threat to Soren. As long as he avoided its sharp teeth, even if he took 1 or 2 hits, it would not be fatal. How could he not fight for Slaughter EXP? "Give me a crossbow." Soren let out a low growl, and the nearby guards reacted quickly and threw their crossbows at Soren. Swoosh! Soren's fingers were so fast that they left afterimages. He finished reloading the crossbow in an instant and shot an arrow at the Ankag's mouth. Attack its jaw. He threw away the crossbow that he had just fired and swooped down with his scimitar in one hand. When he passed by the ankheg, he bent his knee and slid past it. The scimitar left a 2-foot-long wound on the ankheg's front skin. Clang! The guard captain attracted the attention of the ankheg from the front and scratched his chest with its sharp claws. Fortunately, he was still wearing his leather armor, so it only left a shallow wound. Roar! The guard captain's roar reverberated in the air as he swung his sword down and chopped off one of the ankheg's limbs. After passing by the ankheg, Soren rolled on the ground with one hand and did not stop at all. Instead, he stepped on the ankheg's back and started running. The ankheg was about 5 meters tall when it stood upright, which was the height of a 1-story building. Half of its body was still buried in the ground. Soren exerted strength in his legs and leaped up. He then held his scimitar with both hands and plunged it into the ankheg's skull. Die! Dark green blood spurted out from the wound, and Soren felt a burning sensation on his arm. The ankheg's huge body began to tremble and struggle, causing the surrounding soil to splatter everywhere. However, Soren did not flinch at all. Instead, he used his legs to clamp down on the ankheg's skull to ensure his balance and strength. At the same time, he twisted the scimitar's hilt with both hands. His expression was slightly hideous. Blood splattered on his body, and some of his clothes were slightly corroded. Boom! The ankheg fell to the ground with a dull thud. The ankheg struggled violently before it died, and its huge body fell to the ground. Soren let go of his scimitar and lay on the ground, panting heavily. There were spots of blood on his arm, and some of his flesh was also corroded and burned. It's finally dead. He took a deep breath and stood up. Only then did he realize that his thigh had been cut open by the sharp edge of the ankheg's shell when he was riding on it. Blood was gushing out of the wound. The battle was short. A battle of life and death could not be dragged on until one's stamina was depleted. A merchant guard came over to support Soren, who was swaying a little. He then applied some ointment on his wound and quickly asked, "Are you all right? Take off your clothes first. The liquid is very corrosive. Master will heal you later." One was heavily injured, while the other two were lightly injured. Soren took a deep breath and quickly bandaged his thigh. He then said, "Let's go now. Ankhegs live in groups. There should be other ankhegs nearby. Our battle must have alerted them." Chapter 32. As expected. As soon as Soren finished his words, a strange noise was heard nearby. They immediately jumped on their horses and fled in the opposite direction, not even bothering about the loot. In less than 2 minutes, a huge chunk of grass rose from the side of the road, and an ankheg emerged from the ground. That was not the end of it, as another ankheg emerged from the ground, followed by a third. It was a small group of 4 ankhegs. The others turned around and looked behind them. Immediately, they broke out in cold sweat. If not for Soren reminding them to leave immediately, 1 or 2 of them would have died there. One ankheg was already so difficult to deal with, and now there were 3 of them. Even with the strength of a Tier 3 northern barbarian, the captain of the escort team had little chance of surviving. The 3 ankhegs only needed 1 round of acid to wipe out half of them, and the rest would not even last a single round of attack. This was also why ankhegs had a higher challenge rating than snake demons. The ankhegs were aware of their dead companions, and they had a certain level of animal instincts. They let out a sharp shriek in the direction of Soren and the others, and immediately burrowed into the ground to chase after them. However, their speed was obviously slower than horses, and they soon emerged from the ground not far away, staring in the direction where they left. Even wolves knew how to take revenge, let alone supernatural creatures like ankhegs. "Thank you for your help." The guard captain reached out and patted Soren's shoulder. He then held his injured companion tightly and urged his horse to rush in the direction of the caravan. Soren's injuries were slightly better, and he was only affected by the acidic blood. The caravan guard who blocked the acid spray from the front was not in a good condition. Even though his shield blocked most of the acid spray, a lot of it still landed on his body. Now, many parts of his skin were burned and rotted. This was the horror of the Ankheg's acid spray. Not only was it corrosive, but it was also poisonous due to the fact that Ankhegs were creatures. Fortunately, this was only an Ankheg. If it was a wyvern with a challenge rating of 15, its acid spray could even melt armor. That was the real deal. The corrosiveness and toxicity of the wyvern spray attack was one of the best below the legend rank. Wyverns also live in groups. Soon, the caravan appeared before them. The guards reacted very quickly. Immediately, someone came over to support them. At the same time, nearly a third of them pulled out their weapons and automatically surrounded the others. The merchants commanded their workers to gather the carts together and form a simple caravan formation. This was a method used by experienced merchants to defend against the attacks of bandits. "Take me to master." The guard captain took a deep breath and carried his companion down from the horse. In just a short while, the merchant guard's face was as pale as a sheet of paper. It was not only because of the corrosive acid, but also because of the poison that had seeped into his body and the severe loss of blood. Adventuring in the wild not only took away the lives of enemies, but also many further deteriorated injuries, even though their bodies were far stronger than those of the previous earthlings. The caravan guards quickly gathered together. The archers stood on top of the carts, and the warriors in leather armor held up their shields. For a moment, they actually looked like an army. The northern merchants. They were the strongest among the merchants because most of the guards they hired were retired warriors. Many players who became bandits in the past called them hard bones to chew. The curtains of the large carriage, which was protected by the caravan, were lifted and a beautiful woman wearing a veil appeared. She glanced at the injured guard and said in a serious voice, "Clean his wounds immediately and send him to the carriage." After that, she turned to look at Soren and said, "You too. I have a special ointment here. Let them apply it on your wounds." The others sent the warrior to clean his wounds, and the guard captain reported the situation to her. Everything seemed to be in order, and there was no trace of panic. And the center of all this order was this mysterious woman. The descendant of the northern witches. Under her orders, everyone followed them strictly. The merchants who were panicking at the beginning also calmed down and took out some healing potions that they had prepared in advance. The northern witches were mysterious and powerful existences. In some ways, they were even more dangerous than the southern witches. Not only did they have mysterious spells, but they also inherited some of the witch doctor's innate abilities. This was one of the most difficult professions to level up. Advancement requirement, Grade 3, Spellcasting Level 5, Prophecy ability. The heavily injured man was quickly carried over, and the guard captain personally applied medicine on his wounds before pouring a bottle of healing potion down his throat. Soren's injuries were not serious, but Vivian still applied the healing potion all over his body as if he was facing a great enemy. She also carefully bandaged the wound on his thigh, not caring about wasting the precious medicine. She even personally fed Soren another bottle of healing potion. The little girl rarely cried when she grew up. Most of the time, when she saw Soren injured, she would silently help him treat his wounds. She would never cry like other little girls. The tacit understanding between the two of them when they were young made her the one who would help Soren whenever he needed to kill someone. Even though she was very kind. Ankheg's? The mysterious woman frowned. She glanced at Soren and asked the guard captain, "What do we do now? Do we continue forward?" The guard captain showed a troubled expression and said, "I'm not too sure about the habits of these creatures. Maybe he will know more." Everyone looked at Soren. Soren was trying to cheer up the little girl whose eyes were slightly red with tears. When the little girl pulled on his sleeve, he realized that everyone was looking at him. He quickly said, "Ankhegs are very stubborn creatures. They rarely leave their territory. There must be a reason why they are here. But since they are here, they won't leave anytime soon. So there are only two ways. One is to kill them. Otherwise, they will attack the caravan when it passes by. The other is to avoid them and take another route. These creatures won't track us. Detour. The mysterious woman frowned and immediately ordered, Norid. Take some people and kill them. Her tone was unquestionable, and the guard captain named Norid did not hesitate at all. He immediately said in a deep voice, As you wish. Mistress. I will take some people to deal with these problems. After he finished speaking, he began to prepare his men. He ordered some people to take out some shields and left half of them to protect the caravan while the other half followed him to deal with the Ankegs. Most of the people in the caravan called the mysterious woman their mistress. This meant that she was very noble. Even if the others were not her slaves, they were still her servants. As for the identity of this mysterious woman, Sauron could not help but feel a little curious. The Northern Witches. These women could have their own territory in the kingdom of the Frost Goddess. They were definitely not simple characters. Not to mention, they were also a group of dangerous wizards. Sauron thought for a while and stood up. I will go with you. I have some experience in dealing with these things. I want to. It will be much easier to kill them. After he finished speaking, he comforted Vivian and told her that he would be fine. He then mounted his horse and followed the caravan. Since Sauron was only a follower, the mistress of the caravan did not ask him to come along. This was a basic form of respect, but the captain of the guards still looked at Sauron when he gathered his men. It was obvious that he wanted Sauron to come along. The mysterious woman nodded slightly. The guard captain rode to Sauron's side and said in a deep voice, Don't do anything later. Just tell us the weakness of these worms. Sauron touched his curved sword and moved his body a little. He felt the effects of his injuries and said, I know. Get people to prepare more shields. These worms can release a lethal acid spray. Normal leather armor is useless against them. I will think of a way to lure them out later. After killing the Ankeg, Sauron received more than 900 slaughter EXP. After leveling up to grade 2, Sauron needed 3000 slaughter EXP to level up to grade 6 rogue. Now, he could not just rely on picking locks and disarming traps. He needed to kill the monsters himself. This time, with so many people, it was a safe and reliable way to earn slaughter EXP. It would be best if he could get another 900 slaughter EXP. After all, he would not have many chances to encounter these monsters in the future. He also did not have much confidence in killing them alone. It was a normal adventure. Even if he single-handedly cleared out a small group of kobolds, 15 to 30, and an awakened kobold sorcerer, the slaughter EXP he gained was only about 800. He would not let go of this opportunity to increase his strength. P.S. Regarding the exhaustion of stamina after using burst mode, you can watch the heavyweight boxing matches. These are all professional fighters with 15 constitution. Their stamina will drop after a few rounds. Chapter 33. Adventuring in the Wild. Not everyone could calmly face the death of a teammate who had fought side by side with them. That was why the captain of the guards had gathered the best of the best. Sauron glanced at them and found that most of them were at least grade 2, which was the easiest profession to train. Other professions required a lot of resources to train, especially spellcasters. Only warriors could be trained as long as they had enough meat to replenish their nutrients and the corresponding training techniques. However, high-level warriors were more particular about their aptitude, and those who could reach grade 3 or above were not easy to deal with. Spread out. Raise your shields. Sauron took over the command and said in a deep voice, Before the Ankegs attack, there will be some movement on the ground. Be careful of those strange sounds. Everyone, stay at least 5 steps away from the Ankegs. It's best not to take the acid attack head-on. Try to avoid it if you can and make sure there's enough space between you and the Ankegs. Don't use your crossbows. They won't be of much use against the Ankegs unless you have a sharpshooter among you. Don't attack their backs. The Ankegs have the weakest defense around their abdomens. Be careful of their sharp claws. These Ankegs are very strong. Remember to move around them. Don't take their attacks head-on unless it's absolutely necessary. They can reach a height of 5 meters when standing upright, and they can swoop down on you. Protect your heads. The burrower's bite is strong enough to break trees. If the enemy tries to bite you, roll forward immediately. This is the ankheg's blind spot. Their teeth won't be able to reach within a radius of 1.5 meters in front of you. Orders were given one after another. The other guards of the caravan could not help but reveal a trace of shock on their faces, which then gradually turned into respect. This was the respect they had for the strong. Strength didn't just refer to how strong one was. One's wisdom and experience were also a part of one's strength. Experience and wisdom were often more useful than brute force. Soren felt like he had regained the feeling he had when he was adventuring in the wild. After becoming a legend, there were very few wild creatures that could threaten him. It had been a long time since he had experienced such a battle. The two most important things to do when dealing with an ankheg were to avoid its acid spray and bite attack. The acid spray was needless to say, but the bite attack that could tear through trees was just as deadly. However, as arthropods, ankhegs had certain blind spots when they attacked. For example, they couldn't bend their bodies more than a meter in front of them. Since half of the burrower's body was underground, it wasn't convenient for it to move around. At times like this, you just have to be careful of the 6 to 12 legs on their bodies. Actually, there was a simpler way to deal with the ankhegs. That was the mysterious descendant of the Northern Witch. The power of magic was very powerful, and many times, it could achieve unexpected results. However, spellcasters wouldn't easily make a move. Because they had to ensure that their spells were used at the most critical moment, the main members of the wilderness adventuring team were still warriors. The number of spells he could cast was limited. Under normal circumstances, spellcasters would use light crossbows, short bows, catapults, and other long-range weapons to assist in battle. They would also use a staff to help out, as long as they didn't hit their own people. Only when they were dealing with a large number of enemies or boss-level creatures would they cast spells without holding back. A grade 2 wizard could only cast a dozen or so spells in a day. Their lethality was enough. However, their stamina was not as good. Dismount. Before they even got close, Sauron ordered everyone to dismount and walk on foot. He then laid on the ground and listened for a moment before he ordered the others, stomp your feet. Maintain the same rhythm. Stomp your feet as hard as you can. Pay attention to your surroundings. Ankhegs had the ability to sense vibrations, so they were very sensitive to vibrations from the ground. This was the easiest way to anger them. As expected, a slight noise came from the ground, and the ground seemed to bulge a little. They're down there. Soren yelled and began to retreat. He was still injured, so he wasn't in a good condition to fight them head-on. He would have to deal the finishing blow if necessary. Spread out. The captain of the guards roared, and his muscles began to swell. The northern barbarians' berserk ability was very special. Due to the harsh cold and the special training method, they wouldn't be weakened after going berserk. The only downside was that they couldn't go berserk for long. Orc berserkers and barbarians could go berserk for 15 minutes to half an hour. During this period, their stamina and explosive power would be strengthened several times, turning them into killing machines. However, the northern barbarians could only go berserk for a few minutes. They were an advanced warrior class, so they weren't categorized as barbarians. Creak. A strange noise came from the ground, and an ankheg suddenly emerged from the ground and spat acid at the warrior closest to it. The warrior rolled awkwardly on the ground. The warrior dodged half of the attack and covered himself with his shield at the critical moment. Successful dodge. Most of the acid landed on the shield, but the warrior didn't suffer any damage. Kill it. The captain of the guards rushed toward the ankheg with his sword in hand, and the guards scattered around the area also began to attack. 5 warriors moved closer to the ankheg, while the others remained scattered around to keep watch. There were other movements underground, but the ankheg didn't come out like a swarm of bees. They were waiting for an opportunity. Waiting for the enemy to be distracted so that they could ambush the lone barbarian. Damn it. Soren's expression changed drastically. He ran forward frantically and picked up a shield at the same time. The Ankheg had found him. Since he was far from the battlefield, he became the lone barbarian in the eyes of the Ankheg. Hiss! An Ankheg emerged from behind Soren and spat acid at him. Soren rolled and dodged. His 20 points of agility saved Soren's life at the last moment. He dodged the acid by a hair's breadth and used his shield to block the splashing acid. Finally, the last Ankheg emerged. However, because of Soren's sudden appearance, the others were slightly distracted. One of the guards was hit in the arm, and half of the flesh on his arm was corroded. That guy was also a ruthless character. He actually made a prompt decision to cut off his own arm. Then, he clenched his teeth and bandaged the wound. The severed arm fell to the ground and quickly corroded to the point where one could see the white bones. Kasadu! Another guard of the caravan roared, as if he wanted to rush over to help him. Don't be distracted. The caravan guard whose arm had been cut off reached out to stop him. Then, he stepped back and said in a low voice, I'm fine. Kill them first. It was common for warriors to be injured, so they had a high tolerance for pain. However, the guard was able to withstand the pain of losing an arm and still remain calm. This made Soren think highly of him. The guard's willpower was definitely strong, but northerners were born with strong willpower. Perhaps the harsh environment had trained them since they were young. It seemed like he was a retired soldier. Only a soldier who was used to life and death could be so resolute. Attack their lower limbs. Since he was already a target, Soren could not care less. He gritted his teeth and pulled out his scimitar. He began to circle around the Ankheg, attacking it from time to time when it was attacking the others. He left wounds on the weakest parts of the Ankheg's body. As for attacking the head of the Ankheg, it was obviously impossible for him to do so. The injury on his leg had affected his agility. Such a dangerous move could only be attempted when he was in peak condition. Otherwise, he would be risking his life. Die! A deep roar echoed in the air. The guard captain seized the opportunity and jumped up. Just like Soren, he stabbed his sword into the Ankheg's brain through the gap in its shell. The first Ankheg fell to the ground with a loud thud. The pressure on the others was relieved. Soren took the opportunity to leave the battlefield and look for a chance to kill the Ankheg in one shot. The opportunity came quickly. When an Ankheg was about to bite its target, he took a deep breath and started running. He then jumped up and slashed his scimitar at the side of the Ankheg's head. A dark green liquid splashed out. The Ankheg's body stiffened for a moment before it fell to the ground. There was only one left. Just as the others were about to finish off the last Ankheg, the heavily injured one suddenly shrieked and waved its limbs wildly as it burrowed into the ground. It was trying to escape. Soren did not hesitate. He took a deep breath and calmed his heartbeat. He then shouted at another warrior, "Give me a javelin." A long spear was thrown at him. Soren reached out and took the spear. He turned it around and turned the tip of the spear downwards. Then he jumped up abruptly, reaching a height of 4 or 5 meters. He roared, held the handle of the spear with both hands, and stabbed it into the ground. Splat! Dark green blood splattered out. A sharp screech was heard from the ground, and the earth trembled. Soren held the spear tightly and used all his strength to drive the spear into the ground bit by bit. Finally, the ground gradually calmed down. The battle was over. Profession information, Northern Barbarian, they have a unique berserk technique. When they train, they will soak their entire body in ice water. The cold will suppress their berserk strength, and they are unable to increase their strength as much as the barbarians. However, it also reduces the exhaustion of their body's potential. At the same time, they retain their rationality, allowing them to still have decent combat strength after going berserk. Berserk +2 strength, +1 vitality. Chapter 34. The wound opened up again. When Soren let go of the spear, his leg was already bleeding profusely. He was in better condition at the beginning of the battle, but the last 2 leaping attacks had worsened his injury. The wound that had already closed up had opened up again due to the excessive use of force, and it seemed to be even more serious than before. As a result, Soren was limping and had to be carried by the other caravan guards on horseback. But it was worth it. Soren received 1800 slaughter EXP this time. If he wanted to, he could level up to level 6 right away. Let the caravan come over first. Soren glanced at the guard captain and saw that he was also looking at him. He then said in a deep voice, "These worms are worth quite a lot. But it's hard for us to dig them out. Let the others help. Also, I think you guys will need some money too." After he finished speaking, he looked at the other warriors. One of them was severely injured, while the other 6 had light injuries. The ones with light injuries were slightly better. At most, they were scratched by the worms and would recover in a day or 2. However, the severely injured warrior had lost an arm, which meant that his career was over. It was impossible for ordinary people to afford the extremely expensive limb regrowth. The cost of casting a high-level divine spell was more than 3,000 gold dirhams. Moreover, they had to pay a corresponding price. Priest's health, otherwise, Soren would not have waited for half a month to get someone to cast Greater Restoration on him after he was severely injured. According to the rules of this trade, if the caravan guards encountered monsters or bandits on the way, the spoils of war would belong to the caravan guards. The money they exchanged for would also be given to them to settle down the injured and compensate the families of the injured. This time, no one died. This was already considered fortunate. After all, there were bound to be some casualties when challenging an Ankheg above one's level. Ankhegs are level 10. Caravan guards have an average level of 6 to 7. Mark. The guard captain nodded and ordered one of his men, "Go and call them over. Let's drag these worms out together. Be careful of their blood. The blood of these things is acidic. Wrap your hands with a cloth and try not to touch them directly. The most valuable part of an Ankheg is the carapace on its head. It can be used to make armor, and it's also the hardest part of its body." Soren did not help this time. He just sat on his horse and watched the battle unfold. Do you see the carapace by its mouth? It can be used as a part of a gauntlet. It's something that can be easily sold. Pry open the skull from the front. This is a natural enchanted shield. You can use it after forging it. It can be sold for 150 Kindler coins in the city. Get someone to peel off the carapace on the tail. These are used to make half-body armor. The carapace on the back is basically useless. The size is not very suitable. Unless we can find an expert to make a tower shield. The meat of these things is useless. Blood is easy to sell in the swamp, but basically no one needs it here. Get someone to dig out his heart. Some wizards need this kind of strong heart. It should be worth around 10 Kindler coins. Soren said as he ordered them to dismember the Ankhegs and take out the materials that could be sold for gold coins. The respect on the others' faces became more and more obvious. It was not only because Soren killed 2 Ankhegs, but also because of his wealth of knowledge. Experienced teammates like him were the most welcome. They could discover wealth that others didn't know about and maximize the benefits they could get from a battle. They really needed a sum of money. Their injured comrade needed a retirement fund. At the very least, it was enough for him to buy a piece of land and ensure his income for the rest of his life. The caravan soon arrived. The merchants ordered their workers to help them drag the Ankhegs out from the ground and load the valuable items onto the carts. A small group of guards stood guard while the others busied themselves with work. After the intense battle, a rare smile appeared on the guards' faces. According to Soren, the 3 Ankhegs were worth around 1,500 Kindler coins. It was almost the same as their employment fee. Even if they deducted the retirement fund for their injured comrade, each of them would still get around 10 Kindler coins. The captain had already discussed this with them before they dealt with the corpses. He would get 10% of the profits, the heavily injured Gezer would get 15%, the injured would get 20%, 6 people, the ones who participated in the battle would get 15%, 9 people, the ones who didn't participate in the battle would get 10%, 18 people, and finally, Soren would get the remaining 30%. It was a very fair distribution. Soren had contributed a lot in this battle, and without him, it wouldn't have been so easy. Someone might have died in the battle. Fair distribution was the most important factor in maintaining a team, and it was even more important than the friendship that came from fighting side by side. With around 200 Kindler coins and his previous savings, it was enough for his injured comrade to return to his hometown and buy a piece of land that was about 100 acres. He could then hire farmers to farm the land and become a rich farmer. This way, he would have enough money for the rest of his life, and he wouldn't have to live in poverty because of his broken arm. In fact, many adventurers were very concerned about this. They were in a business that involved blood on the edge, and no one knew when they would no longer be able to pick up a knife. The caravan continued to move forward. Because of the respect the guards had for Soren, the other merchants were also in awe of him, and there was even a hint of curiosity on their faces. Wanderers. These people were either notorious thieves or legendary figures in the wilderness. People who wandered alone in the wilderness were qualified to become the main characters in the stories told by the bards. For example, Aragorn was the main character in The Lord of the Rings. On the large carriage. The mysterious woman glanced at the body of the Ankheg, and as if she could feel the fierce battle that had just begun, she ordered, "Tell the merchants to prepare some compensation. I'll only take 20% of the profits this time." The servant in charge quickly retreated and began to discuss with the merchants. Obviously, she didn't realize that Soren had already maximized the profits from the battle. After the mysterious woman finished speaking, she glanced at Soren and noticed the bloodstains on his thigh. She frowned and said, "Come to the carriage. The wound on your thigh needs to be stitched up, or else it won't be easy for you to recover." Soren felt the wound on his thigh, then immediately got down from the horse and staggered into the carriage. The interior of the carriage was very spacious. The room was covered with soft woolen cloth. Just by looking at it, one could feel that it was very comfortable. In the middle of the room was a low table with a metal copper stove, unknown, and a deck of tarot cards thrown on top of it. It was said that the northern witches could rely on them to predict fortune and misfortune. There was a faint fragrance in the air. He couldn't tell what it was, but it made him feel refreshed. It was similar to the fragrance that wizards used when they were preparing to memorize spells. The mysterious woman bent down and rummaged around. Her full and round buttocks were like a full moon, and it attracted Soren's attention. It was very rude to look at a woman's buttocks, especially when she was treating his wound. So Soren quickly looked away and put the clothes under his thigh to prevent the blood from falling on the expensive fur. "Do you want to do it yourself? Or do you want me to do it?" The mysterious woman took out a curved silver needle and a translucent thread. The needle was made of a special material and wouldn't cause the wound to become infected. Soren glanced at it and said in a low voice, "I'll do it myself." "Okay." The mysterious woman lit a candle and put the needle on it to warm it. Then she put the needle through the translucent thread and handed it to Soren. Sizzle. Soren took the needle and untied the bandaged wound. He then pierced the needle into the flesh and sutured it. The pain made him suck in a breath of cold air. Then he clenched his teeth and started to suture the wound bit by bit. This kind of wound needed to be sutured in order to heal quickly. Otherwise, even if he used healing potions, it wouldn't be very effective. Even the slightest movement could cause the wound to open again. Although the healing potion had some magical and divine effects, it wasn't omnipotent. When Soren finished suturing the wound that was almost half a foot long, his whole body was covered in cold sweat. The mysterious woman looked at him silently and said, "It seems like you've learned how to bandage wounds. It's a necessary skill in the wild." Soren replied casually. Then he took out a bandage and applied some ointment, carefully wrapping it around the wound. At the same time, a row of data appeared, "Suture successful. You've successfully sutured the wound. You've reduced your injury. Heal +2. At this time, Soren finally had the time to look at his stats page. He didn't know when, but there were a lot of new skills. They were all basic skills that were commonly used. Name, Soren race, half-elf attributes, strength 14, +2, dexterity 20, +1, vitality 19, intelligence 18, +1, wisdom 15, charm 16 alignment, lawful evil profession, level 10 commoner, max, /level 5 rogue, 0/3000, grade 2, health points, 52 experience points, 3650, slaughter exp, 100, profession exp, unassigned, skill points, none attribute points, none status, normal basic skills, sneak 103, steal 35, pick lock 45, snare 55, negotiate 3, appraise 1, deceive 3, act 1, literacy 1, dodge, roll, 5. Listen 3, heal 2, spell identify 1 legendary skills, omnipotent hands, sealed, weakened, personal abilities, nimble left hand, eidetic memory, perseverance profession abilities, grasp of shadows, military weapon, proficiency, combat skills, shadow strike. Other than the basic skills that he had learned at the beginning, Soren also gained 3 listen, to fight against Ankegs, 5 dodge, to fight against Ankegs, 1 negotiate, to fight against Ankegs, and 2 heal, to fight against Ankegs. It seemed like his basic skills could be leveled up through training. Chidian.com welcomes readers to visit and read our latest, fastest, and hottest serialized works on Chidian originals. Mobile users can read it at Chidian.com. Chapter 35. They cleaned up the battlefield. The caravan continued to move forward. Soren couldn't ride a horse due to his injuries, so he could only sit on one of the carriages. The mysterious woman didn't invite him into the carriage since they weren't that close. However, she did invite Vivian, but the girl shook her head and refused. She climbed onto the carriage and sat beside Soren. The group continued to move forward in silence. The caravan guards continued to investigate the area, and from time to time, they would call for people to fill up the holes on the roads. The heavy rain had turned the roads into muddy roads, and there were even puddles of water in them. Soren was very dirty, and Vivian was patting the dust off him. Of course, he couldn't care less about his image during a battle. He rolled and dodged on the ground, and by the time he was dry, he was covered in mud. The little girl was carefully patting him down, and she even used her small hands to rub the dust off his clothes. The others were busy with their own matters, and when they saw the 2 people on the carriage, they couldn't help but smile. Their impression of the 2 had improved a little. Especially the mysterious woman sitting in the carriage. She would occasionally lift the curtain and look at the 2 of them. Of course, her gaze was mostly on the cute little girl, as if there was something about her that attracted her attention. The scene at this moment was very peaceful. Soren sat cross-legged on the carriage and used a rag to wipe his scimitar. The blood of the Ankeg was acidic, and if it wasn't cleaned properly, it would affect the weapon's use. The little girl sat beside him and wiped the mud off his clothes. Occasionally, she would even puff up her mouth and blow on his clothes. Due to the poor quality of the cloth, the mud had seeped into the gaps of his clothes. The coarse cloth wasn't dense enough. Even after patting it clean, the little girl was still a little dissatisfied. Use this. The captain of the guard smiled as he rode past. He took out a pouch and threw it to Soren. This is refined essential oil. It can be used to maintain your weapon. Naturally, a scimitar wasn't something that could be polished by just polishing it. For people like them who relied on fighting and killing to survive, a good weapon meant the guarantee of their lives. Soren smiled and reached out to take it. Using his fingers, he took out some ointment and carefully smeared it on the curved sword. This refined ointment could prevent weapons from rusting. It was best to have some on hand before obtaining an extraordinary weapon. Even if it was an extraordinary grade enchanted weapon, it still needed to be maintained regularly. This was an attitude towards battle. Soren wiped his scimitar dry with a cloth and put it back into the scabbard. Perhaps it was because of the exhaustion from the battle, or perhaps it was because he had lost a lot of blood when he was first injured, but he looked tired and sleepy. Unknowingly, he leaned against the cart and dozed off. The little girl looked at him quietly. Perhaps she was a little tired, so she leaned her head against his chest, careful not to touch his wound. The caravan continued to move forward. Occasionally, there would be guards riding on the road, but they would also slow down a little. This was a form of respect for the strong. Soren might not be able to beat them one-on-one. However, he had earned the respect of the guards during the battle against the Ankegs. In fact, Soren was not asleep. In fact, he rarely fell asleep in the wilderness. Most of the time, he was in a state of feigning sleep. He was half asleep. Even the slightest noise would wake him up. He knew how dangerous the wilderness was, and he had to be vigilant at all times. It was already evening. The caravan still had no intention of stopping. When Soren woke up, he found the little girl sleeping in his arms. He carefully pulled his arm out, trying not to wake Vivian up. Unfortunately, the little girl opened her eyes and rubbed them. She looked up and said, "Brother, you're awake?" Soren nodded with a smile and reached out to stroke her hair. A caravan guard who had fought the Ankegs with him passed by and threw some bread and meat to him with a smile. There were not many rules when adventuring in the wilderness. The bread was prepared in advance and was a little hard. The meat was air-dried and was easier to swallow because it was still warm in his arms. People who spent a lot of time in the wilderness would keep their food close to their chest and mouth. This way, the food would not be too cold to swallow. Soren broke off a piece of bread and gave it to Vivian. He then tore off a piece of meat. Since they were not going to start a fire, there was no soup. Soren swallowed the food with water and whispered, "Let's set up camp later. I'll make you something good to eat." They were in the wilderness. With his skills, hunting 2 rabbits was a piece of cake. Since there were no traces of human activity, there were a lot of wild animals here. The only problem was that starting a fire might alert the monsters in the wilderness. However, with so many people around, there was nothing to be afraid of. The little girl was not picky at all. She quietly swallowed the bread with water. Suddenly, she seemed to feel something and looked up at the forest not far away. She pulled Soren's clothes with her small hand and whispered, "Big brother. Something seems to be watching us over there." Soren held his scimitar and stood on top of the cart to look around. Unfortunately, he could not see anything. However, based on his past experience, he could tell what was watching them. "It's okay." He gently rubbed the little girl's head and said slowly, "It's a knoll that lives here. It must have noticed us. But these things don't dare to attack a large caravan. We'll leave their area of activity later." Gnolls. One of the most common creatures in the wilderness. They were more dangerous than goblins and kobolds. They had sharp fangs and claws and were agile. At the same time, they were also quite intelligent. These creatures liked to attack lone travelers. However, when it came to large caravans, they rarely attacked large groups of prey unless they were strong enough to defeat them. Gnolls were not very large carnivores. Most of them only had 15 to 30 gnolls, and they were scattered into 5 to 8 family units. Compared to attacking heavily guarded caravans, they were more inclined to hunt wild beasts and goblins. At least the latter was not very dangerous. If they attacked humans in the wilderness, they would not be able to avoid casualties. Generally, when there were more than 5 people in a group, the gnolls would choose to attack in the middle of the night. At first, they would stalk their prey quietly. Because the forest nearby was getting thicker, the caravan guards also shrank their scouting formation. The number of scouts at the front was increased to 5 to ensure that there would be reinforcements in case of an accident. Some of the merchants were already complaining. It was very troublesome to travel in the dark. If there was not enough light, the cows and horses would have to slow down. Fortunately, soon, a bright moon appeared. The moon was very bright today. The cold moonlight illuminated the surroundings, making it easier for them to move forward. The caravan guards lit up their torches. The workers also placed the torches that they had prepared in advance on the big carriages. In the middle of the big carriage, the mysterious woman quietly walked out. She stood on the shaft of the carriage and looked around. Then, she pointed her finger at the top of the carriage and uttered a strange syllable. Then, the top of the big carriage lit up. Illumination. The mysterious woman's wizard level was probably not low. She was able to light up an area of hundreds of feet. 30 meters, 50 meters, the caravan cheered. The power of the spell made many people excited. The merchants also showed a relieved smile. That sister's spell is so powerful. The little girl quietly approached Soren and whispered, "My illumination spell is so small, but she can light up such a large area." She was at least a professional level 15. Soren looked at the carriage. He did not expect the mysterious woman to be a senior witch. The light made it easier for the caravan to move forward. However, it also exposed their location. Pairs of green eyes could be seen in the dark forest nearby. Those were the wolves and beasts that lived nearby. A woo! A loud wolf howl echoed in the wilderness. A calf-sized wolf king appeared on a small hill in the distance. It was a wild warg. It took a deep look at the caravan in the distance, and its eyes locked onto the big carriage. As if it felt the gaze of the mysterious woman, its strong body trembled, and then it let out a low howl. Waves of wolf howls could be heard. The wolves that were hiding in the darkness walked out one after another. Their green eyes disappeared as they followed the wolf king in other directions. Wargs were quite intelligent. They were even smarter than warhorses. There were still many prey to hunt in the wilderness. There was no need to provoke this caravan. Not to mention that there was a wizard among them. Their fear of spellcasters had long seeped into their blood for thousands of years. Countless painful lessons had taught these wild beasts that they should never provoke those who could cast spells. As long as they did not provoke them, these beasts would not easily attack those who could cast spells. Chapter 36. The night was getting darker. The 12 hours of continuous trekking had already made many people feel very tired. Even the warriors, whose physiques were far superior to ordinary people, had a look of exhaustion on their faces. The task of the guards was not simply to follow the caravan. It was very tiring to keep an eye on the situation. Under normal circumstances, they would spend less than 6 hours a day on the road. However, the mysterious mistress did not order them to stop, so they had no choice but to move on. Many of them were already complaining. Soren was very quiet in the night. His figure was slightly hazy, as if the night had automatically wrapped around him. The road ahead was getting worse and worse. Since they were far away from Amber City, the road had not been traveled by for a long time. Only when they were about 50 kilometers away from the next city would the road gradually recover, and there would be traces of human activity. The mysterious mistress looked very cautious. She did not return to the carriage. Instead, she stood on the carriage and looked ahead. Occasionally, she would look back in the direction of Amber City. Suddenly, she frowned and looked into the distance. She snorted coldly and said, "How dare you use a prophecy spell on me?" A cold light flashed. A dark golden card appeared on her fingertips. On the back of the card was a 9-pointed star array. On the front, the outline of a crown could be vaguely seen. Soren's eyesight was not that good yet, so he could not see it clearly. In an instant, the stars in the sky seemed to have dimmed. The mysterious mistress' face was filled with anger. She uttered a series of strange syllables, and the air around her seemed to have frozen. The caravan guards around her spontaneously gathered around her. They did not even care about the merchants nearby. It seemed that the mistress' safety was the most important thing to them. Wizards were at their weakest when they were casting spells. This was not the time to let others get close to her. Sue. Oh. So, the incantations of spells were all strange monosyllabic and polysyllabic. They were different from the language used by normal people. Without special training, it was very difficult to say these words. Casting language, casting gesture. Basic ability. A bright light appeared. The mistress sneered and slowly put away the card. She waved her hand tiredly and said, "It's safe now. There's a lake up ahead. We'll set up camp there." Amber City. In the mysterious basement, the red-robed priest standing on the altar suddenly trembled and spat out a mouthful of blood. His face was pale as he muttered, "The prophecy failed. Someone interfered with my prophecy spell. Counterspell, prophecy counterspell. The opponent might be a legendary magus. The Son of God's aura has been concealed by him. Awaken the Terror Knight immediately. The Son of God will awaken amidst the aura of despair and fear. At that time, my lord's will descend upon him. Let's begin the sacrificial ceremony." Depraved prayers echoed in the dark basement. The followers in black robes slit the throats of the sacrifices with daggers. Blood flowed along the demonic array and seeped into the marble coffins around them. The ripples of undead energy began to spread. The aura of destruction from the abyss shrouded the surroundings. The marble coffins turned into dust in the violent energy storm. Along with the sound of heavy armor clanking, 8 fearsome knights covered in pitch-black heavy armor stood up. They had blood-red pupils as if there were flames burning in them. From the moment they woke up, the merciless killing had already shrouded the basement. The Terror Knights pulled out their heavy beheading swords and began to kill the evil believers in the basement. Blood and limbs splattered everywhere. The red-robed priest did not seem to have expected such a thing to happen. He stiffened and collapsed on the altar. A loud neigh sounded. Blood gathered in the blasphemous language. The Dread Knight knelt on the ground with one knee and stabbed the pitch-black executioner's sword into the magic circle. Then, with a blazing flame, nightmares rushed out from the bloody void one after another. There were no words. The Terror Knights mounted their horses, and the shadows of vengeful spirits could be seen on their mottled black cloaks. The nightmares' hooves burned with scorching flames. They raised the beheading swords in their hands and slammed directly into the basement wall that was more than 2 meters thick. Rumble. The silent sound of collapsing echoed in the basement. The nightmares stepped on the air, and with traces of flames, they crashed through the basement wall and rushed all the way to the surface. Terror Knight, Legendary, Grade 5. Challenge Rating, 16, Monster Level, 24, High Undead. Highest and lowest attributes, 25, 15, total attribute points, 95 to 110. Special abilities, Beheading Sword, Legendary, Advanced Charge, Nightmare Mount, Summon the Undead, Blasphemous Language, Aura of Fear, Aura of Death, Abyss Knight, Destructive Attack, Slash, Sword Form, Beheading, Sword Form, Waist Slash, Sword Form, Depraved Cross. Difficulty, A+. Nightmare, Demon, Grade 4. Challenge Rating, 12, Monster Level, 18, Large Otherworld Creature. Highest and lowest attributes, 21, 12, total attribute points, 90 to 100. Special abilities, Flaming Hoof, Advanced Charge, Dark Vision, Flying Run, Powerful Tackle, Demon Resistance, Otherworld Creature. Difficulty, A-. It was a quiet night. After a long and arduous journey, they finally arrived at the campsite. Everyone couldn't help but cheer. Finally, they could take a break. Although it was almost midnight, the workers still took the time to get water and start a fire. They also put some food into a big pot to cook. They had been eating dry food for the whole day, and now they just wanted to drink some hot soup and have a good sleep. The caravan guards still didn't dare to let down their guard. They began to arrange for people to keep watch and at the same time, set up a simple security line. The water source was a place where wild beasts gathered. Under normal circumstances, they shouldn't camp here. But since it was the arrangement of the mistress, they could only follow her orders. There were only 2 people in the team who were uneasy. One of them was Soren. He didn't expect the mysterious woman to be a witch whose profession level was above 16. It could be said that she was half a step into the realm of legendary. There weren't many witches like her in the entire north. At the very least, they were members of the Witch Council. Their status was equivalent to a small city lord in the southern dukedom. There was no reason for such a noble wizard to escort a caravan. Normally, even if there were witches in a caravan, their profession level wouldn't be higher than 12. Many caravans had been attacked in the past. Unless she had a special mission. If she really did have a special mission, then it might not be a good thing for Soren and Vivian to follow the caravan. It was very likely that they would be involved in other dangerous situations. The other person who was uneasy was the mistress of the caravan. She kept looking in the direction of Amber City, as if something terrible was about to happen. There was a faint trace of worry on her face. Time passed little by little. The workers prepared food for the night. The caravan guards took turns to eat. Soren was also given a bowl of fragrant soup. Perhaps she was really tired today. The little girl ate very quickly, and there was a trace of sleepiness on her delicate face. Soren didn't eat anything. First, he set up a tent for camping. Then, he scattered some powder that repelled poisonous insects around the tent. Finally, he carried the sleepy Vivian into the tent. However, just as Soren was about to eat something, he suddenly felt a chill run down his spine. Suddenly, as if he had a lingering fear, he raised his head and looked in the direction of Amber City. He pulled out his scimitar in an instant and ran up the hill not far away. The mistress of the caravan was one step ahead of him. In the distance, the sky was burning red. It looked like a huge cloud of fire had appeared in the middle of the night. At this moment, they were already hundreds of miles away from Amber City. They couldn't see the area covered by the cloud of fire, but they knew that it was happening in Amber City. A level 9 spell. Meteor Burst, Legendary. Spellcaster level 20. This was not the first time Soren had seen this spell, but when he saw it again, he could not help but feel a little shocked in his heart. This was the easiest legendary spell to learn, 9th Circle. It required a wizard to have a profession level of 20. A professional once calculated the damage of this spell, and it was equivalent to 8 Tomahawk missiles, land, bombarding a target within a 5-kilometer radius. At that time, a legendary warrior joked that if he could resist this spell, he could resist an air-to-ground missile attack in real life. Among all professions, only legendary warriors and barbarians dared to say that they could resist a level 9 spell. Back then, the first warrior to become a legendary warrior took a video of him bathing in lava, and it shocked many people. Warriors were once considered to be the most miserable profession, and it was only then that a period of explosive growth was ushered in. Unfortunately, there were too few warriors who could reach the legendary realm alive. Chapter 37. Amber City. The once bustling city was now in ruins. Flames burned everywhere, and weak cries for help could be heard from the collapsed buildings. Unfortunately, no one was there to save these pitiful commoners. Dark shadows lingered in the burning ruins, and blue soul flames appeared in the eyes of the pale skeletons. Corpses came back to life one after another in the blasphemous language. They picked up their weapons and walked towards the only place in Amber City that was still intact. The Temple District. This was the only part of Amber City that was still intact. The temples of the gods emitted a faint light, and the statues of the gods were covered in a layer of spiritual light. The temple guards stood at the front, and behind them were the surviving Amber City guards. Even the once gentle and elegant priests, who loved to preach, had taken off their robes and put on heavy armor. They were not pure spellcasters, but they also had decent melee skills. The priestess who had helped Soren before was among them. She wore a silver half-body armor and held a knight's shield in her hand. Her weapon was a 3-foot-long flail. This weapon was very difficult to use, and its lethality was also top-notch. She had once received specialized combat training, but when it came to choosing a weapon, none of the other weapons were as comfortable as a flail. That was why she had chosen this unique and dangerous weapon to wield. The slender priestess wore a silver half-body armor, held a knight's shield in one hand, and held a heavy flail in the other. Such a scene was visually shocking. However, it also showed how dangerous the situation was. Even the non-official priests had to participate in the battle. Behind them were the few survivors of Amber City. These survivors hid in the temples and shivered, waiting for their final fate. The blasphemous language was still echoing in the air. Among the evil fallen, there were even more evil blasphemous priests. They were using blasphemous language to weaken the divine protection of the temple. The 8 dread knights circled around the temple area. The nightmares beneath them spewed out flames with the smell of sulfur. Countless undead wandered around the area. The dead that were resurrected by the blasphemous language would disappear at dawn the next day. However, they might not be able to wait until then. The temple's power was getting weaker and weaker. The Terror Knight commanded the nightmares to get closer. Even though they were still anxious, the nightmares were getting closer and closer to the temple. This was a terrifying existence that they could not match. 8 legendary-level Terror Knights. Even if Amber City used up all of its forces, they would not be able to defeat them. Despair shrouded the ruined city. Fear. It was everywhere. However, just as everyone had given up hope and was preparing to welcome their final fate, a strange commotion suddenly occurred in the distance. The priests began to comfort the others, telling them that even if death befell them, their souls would return to the kingdom of God, where they would live a peaceful and eternal life. The guardian knights of the temple had already begun to kneel down and pray. They were pleading for the blessings of the gods and vowed to fight until the last moment. As long as the power of the temple was not desecrated, their souls would not be contaminated. Suddenly, one of the Amber City guards had a look of disbelief on his face as he pointed to the front and shouted, "Look over there." An inconspicuous figure appeared in the darkness. He had a bald head, with not a single strand of hair on it. He was only wearing tattered clothes made of coarse cloth and simple leggings. He did not have any weapons in his hands. However, he was surrounded by countless undead. Groups of undead attacked him in a frenzy. The ghosts stretched out their claws at him, while the skeletons swung their swords at him. However, he did not seem to care at all. When these attacks landed on him, they did not cause any ripples. Not even a single hair on his body was harmed. He just calmly looked in front of him, and when he saw the survivors of the temple, he showed a hint of relief. "At least I'm still in time." He sighed in a low voice and then stomped his foot, causing an invisible wave of air to erupt. Hundreds of skeletons and ghosts around him were sent flying. The ground cracked in all directions like a spider web, and in the rumbling sound of the ground collapsing, all the stone slabs within a 100-meter radius with him as the center were reduced to tiny pieces of stone. Transcendent and saintly. Pastor Phil had a look of disbelief on his face. He looked in front of him and suddenly shouted, "Form a defensive formation. Divine buff. Hold on until dawn, and we'll be saved." A legendary monk. The inconspicuous figure that appeared in front of them was a legendary monk, and it was the rarest ascetic monk. Does not wear any armor, does not use any weapons. 1-inch punch, legendary. The inconspicuous monk that appeared in the darkness suddenly leaped forward, crossing a distance of tens of meters. He clenched his fist and punched at the skeleton knight in front of him. The skeleton knight that was awakened by the blasphemous words trembled. The undead armor on its body did not change at all, but the bones in its body shattered inch by inch, turning it into a pile of broken bones. Flaming sun. Facing the undeads that were coming from all directions, the monk clasped his palms together, and then a scorching flame burst out from his palms. When he struck out with his palms, the air around him exploded with a dull sound, and a surging heat wave spread out along with the scorching flame. The strong air wave blew the surrounding sand and stones, and the nearby undeads were also sent flying more than 10 meters away. The low-grade skeletons fell down in batches. The blasphemous priests finally discovered the monk's existence. 3 of them walked out and began to cast spells. Several evil lights appeared one after another, and shot towards the monk in the distance. Shadow Moon. The monk's expression did not change at all. He suddenly put his palms together, and his skin turned golden. A silver-white energy field appeared, and directly resisted all the spells. Then, he suddenly jumped, and his figure disappeared into thin air. Ethereal form. Traceless steps. The monk's figure appeared in front of the blasphemous priests in an instant, and directly shouted with a palm strike. Mage armor, master, stone skin. An invisible energy field appeared around the blasphemous priests, and in an instant, it blocked the monk's attack. At the same time, his body turned into a stone color, and his whole body was wrapped in it. The nearby blasphemy oracles began to cast spells rapidly, covering them with another energy deflection field. Vajra palm. The monk withdrew his palm, and when he punched out again, his palm turned golden. Accompanied by a crisp cracking sound, the energy field around the blasphemous priests was instantly shattered. At the same time, the stone skin on his body cracked and collapsed in the blink of an eye. With just the power of a palm strike, a blasphemous priest's sternum was completely caved in, and all the bones in his body were shattered, and he fell to the ground like mud. A group of stupid spellcasters. Do you really think a layer of stone skin and an energy shield can block our attacks? In the darkness, an incomparably strong figure walked out. Along with his footsteps, the ground could not help but tremble. It was a majestic man about 2.4 meters tall. Just the size of his arm was already the size of a person's waist. He carried a heavy axe in one hand, and it was probably more than 600 pounds. It was as heavy as a door plank, and just like that, he casually walked into the encirclement of the undead. "Leave this to me," the majestic man said, and then suddenly hammered his own chest. His originally abnormally strong body, which was already abnormally strong, began to expand. Terrifying muscles and ferocious blue veins appeared, and with a crackling sound, the bones in his body grew one by one, and his whole body became a 3-meter-tall behemoth. Berserk. But this was not the end. Accompanied by a wild growl, he fiercely hammered the ground. His already exaggerated body size began to explode once again. Legendary Berserk. The ground cracked under the terrifying power, and the majestic figure had turned into a 5-meter-tall giant. The axe that was not very symmetrical was now just right in his hand. Terrifying muscles filled with endless power covered his entire body, and ferocious earthworm-like veins appeared on his tough skin. He looked like an ancient killing machine. SBD. An incomparably wild roar that resounded through the heavens and earth erupted. With this horrifying figure as the center, the skeletons within a 50-meter radius were directly shattered into skeletons. The nearby blasphemous priests screamed miserably, and traces of blood seeped out of their ears, eyes, and nostrils. They seemed to have gone mad, and they just lay on the ground with idiotic smiles on their faces. War roar, legendary. Sound wave attack. The 5-meter-tall giant rested his heavy axe on his shoulder. He glanced at the blasphemous priests who had turned into idiots and mocked, "What a bunch of weak spellcasters." Endurance failed. Earth-shattering slash. The giant stomped his foot, and a crack appeared on the ground. The place where the blasphemous priests were standing collapsed, and the rubble completely buried the weak spellcasters. Asterisk thud thud thud. Asterisk the sound of heavy hooves echoed in the ruins. When he saw the dread knight in front of him, the legendary barbarian's face showed a hint of seriousness. He slowly put down the heavy axe and licked his lips. Finally, a worthy opponent has appeared. Undying rage. A blood-red aura covered his skin. The barbarian roared and swung his axe at the dread knight in front of him. Asterisk clang. Asterisk a heavy executioner's sword firmly blocked the attack of the axe. The nightmare lord let out a painful cry, and the horse's hooves sank deep into the ground. The dread knight slowly dismounted from his warhorse, and his blood-red eyes stared at the barbarian in front of him. He tore off the blood-stained cloak on his body, and his black-scaled armor changed from one hand to two, and the heavy executioner's sword was held horizontally in front of his chest. The real battle. Until now, it had only just begun. Class skill, legendary rage, strength +10, constitution +10, immune to all mind control spells, immune to labyrinth, immune to imprisonment, unlimited stamina for the duration. Class skill, transcendence. After a long period of training, the monk's body has gradually been trained to perfection. His body has become a supernatural existence. Any non-supernatural physical attack will not be able to harm the monk. The monk is immune to all normal weapon attacks. Only rare weapons +1 or above or enchanted weapons can harm him. Chapter 38. The night passed quickly. When Soren woke up the next day, the caravan seemed to be the same as before, but he knew that some things had completely changed. For example, Amber City. Perhaps there would be no more of this city in the future, because he finally remembered where he had heard of its name. It was a battle of the legendary realm. Legendary professions would appear on the stage of history from this night, and the battle between them and the children of God had just begun. At this moment, Soren just wanted to stay as far away from them as possible. As a former legendary rogue, he knew too well the difference between the legendary realm and the non-legendary realm. When he was still a level 19 rogue, it could be said that he was still in the range of mortals, and there was not much change at all. However, when he became a level 20 legendary rogue, he already had the ability to travel between the material plane and the shadow plane, and he could directly travel through space with his powerful spell-like abilities. Even dimensional anchor could not lock onto him. If it were not for the fact that he could only travel between the shadow plane and the material plane once a day, he would probably be able to go anywhere in the world. The monks, transcendence, the barbarians, legendary berserk, the priests, summon angel, and so on. The abilities of the legendary realm were already close to the range of the gods. Even the warriors who had always been suffering had made a breakthrough. Legendary tenacity allowed them to bathe in lava before coming out, and legendary fortify allowed them to fight head-on with dragons. If it was a legendary grand sword saint, it would be even more exaggerated. The blade storm, advanced whirlwind, would be directly immune to all spells below the 6th circle, and its lethality would make other professions ashamed. Of course, it was best not to provoke the legendary wizards because many of them could time stop, at least not before getting the demigod divinity. Immune to legendary time spells. Soren wanted to keep a distance from them. At least before he was strong enough, he wanted to stay as far away from these dangerous existences as possible to avoid being implicated and dying without knowing why. He did not ponder for long. Because some movements outside had awakened everyone, a big guy had come near their camp. It was an adult saber-toothed tiger. The king of beasts in the wilderness. When there was a lack of food, it would even include the drake, challenge rating 10, into its menu. One of the most dangerous felines in the world. When Soren appeared, the others were obviously scared out of their wits. Some of the merchants were so scared that they fell to the ground. It was an adult male saber-toothed tiger with a body length of 4.5 meters, a tail length of 2.7 meters, a shoulder height of about 2 meters, and a weight of about 800 to 1,000 kilograms. Its appearance was not much different from other tiger-type creatures, but it had a pair of saber-toothed teeth that were about 15 centimeters long in its mouth. This was an innate +3 extraordinary dagger that could be used with simple polishing. It had an extremely powerful penetrative ability, and it was a good item that many thieves dreamed of. The king of the wastelands came to the side of the lake, its extraordinary intelligence allowing it to stare intently at the humans before it. After looking at it for a while, it lost interest and lowered its head to drink water by the lake. The guards of the caravan nearby were a little frightened at first, but then some of them were eager to try. Some of them even carefully took out strong crossbows. Perhaps to them, it was not impossible for them to deal with a saber-toothed tiger since they had already killed several ankhegs. Don't be impulsive. Soren quickly reached out to stop them, then looked at the captain and said in a deep voice, "This is a saber-toothed tiger. Its diet even includes earth dragons," Zhang Heng said. "Are you really going to let these impulsive fellows attack it?" A saber-toothed tiger that weighed a ton. It was obviously close to the level of a supernatural creature. If it were to undergo a further elemental mutation, it would be able to directly cross the realm and enter outer space. Attacking it would be suicidal. Normal saber-toothed tigers were level 12, but the one in front of them was at least level 16. Unless the mysterious mistress intervened, everyone here would not be enough to fill the gaps between its teeth. Do you see those gleaming sharp claws? Soren pointed and said in a serious tone, those claws can tear chainmail apart. Even the subspecies of land dragons can't withstand more than a few hits. Don't disturb it. A king of the wastelands like this will not lack food. As long as you don't provoke it, it will leave after drinking. Soren's judgment was correct. The saber-toothed tiger quietly left after drinking, but before it left, it looked at the carriage in the middle. The captain was obviously angry, and he pulled out the impulsive fellows to teach them a lesson. Soren's expression was very serious. He seemed to have thought of something and silently looked in the direction of a forest, then said, "This is the south. You are not familiar with this place, so it's best not to act rashly. The saber-toothed tiger is a creature of the same level as the winter wolves. An adult male saber-toothed tiger can directly challenge a small group of winter wolves. If it weren't for the fact that there are so many winter wolves, the north would be their territory." Winter wolves. They were large supernatural beasts that had the ability to speak. They could speak the common language and the language of giants, and they could spit out frost attacks. They had excellent sensory tracking abilities, and their intelligence was similar to that of ordinary humans. However, they were very cunning and cruel. The winter wolf was one of the most dangerous creatures in the tundra. Its fur could be sold for 2,000 kindler in the north, and 3,000 kindler in the south. It was one of Soren's favorite prey. If it weren't for the winter wolf, it would have been very difficult for him to earn enough money to become a legendary rogue in such a short time. As for the saber-toothed tiger, it could be regarded as half a legendary warrior. However, a king of the wastelands like the saber-toothed tiger was very rare. Logically speaking, it shouldn't have appeared in this area. Didn't they like to roam the plains with wild cows? Could it be that something forced it to migrate? Creatures like the saber-toothed tiger were rarely forced to leave their territory. Even if they encountered a dragon subspecies, they would still fight with their lives on the line, unless there was something they couldn't compete with. Could it be? Soren calculated his position, and his expression suddenly became very ugly. He found that he wasn't far from where the ancient red dragon appeared. The ancient red dragon only appeared a few months later. However, this didn't mean that it didn't appear in the vicinity a few months ago. It was just that it wasn't discovered until then. It seemed that a lot of big events were brewing in advance. The time when they were known to the world was just that they happened to erupt during that time period. Big Brother. He didn't know when the little girl had gotten up. She glanced at the direction where the saber-toothed tiger left, but there was no fear on her face. Instead, she held Soren's hand and said with great interest, "That big cat is so beautiful and mighty. Vivian also wants to raise one in the future." Soren, who looked a little nervous, smiled and patted her little head. He jokingly said, "When Vivian becomes a sorcerer, she can sign a magic pet. Maybe I can really sign a contract with such a majestic big cat." The little girl was still very confused. She had never seen a tiger before, and there were no tigers around Amber City. She had never left Amber City before, and it was her first time seeing a tiger. She didn't expect that she would think that it was a big cat. But she wasn't wrong. The saber-toothed tiger was also a cat. The little girl didn't notice that Soren was joking. Instead, she looked at the tiger seriously and said happily, "Really? Then it can carry me everywhere to play. If anyone dares to bully me, I'll let it bite them. It's so big. It must be very strong when it comes to fighting." Soren didn't interrupt the little girl's naive fantasy. He reached out and picked her up, put her on the carriage, and said casually, "Well then, Vivian, you'll have to work hard. A big cat like that won't listen to you so easily." After that, he began to pack his things. There were still 4 or 5 days of travel to Whiterun, and it wouldn't be a peaceful journey. Soren was busy tidying up the tent and preparing breakfast. The cute little girl tilted her head and sat on the side of the carriage. She held her chin with one hand and muttered to herself, "How can I make that big cat listen to me? It's so big, and I'm so small. There's no way I can beat it. What should I do?" The little girl rubbed her head in frustration. It seemed that she really didn't know what to do. Sigh. It would be great if I could raise a big cat like that. The fur on its body looked warm. The little girl was still in a daze, but the mysterious mistress of the caravan had already walked up to her. Chapter 39. By the time Soren had finished packing his luggage, the mysterious mistress had already left. He glanced at the mysterious woman in the distance, squatted down, and whispered, "Vivian. What did she say to you?" The little girl did not hide anything from him. She tilted her head and answered, "Nothing much. She just asked me how old I am. Then she asked me if I can read. Don't worry. I didn't tell her that I can cast spells." Soren nodded. It was best not to let anyone know that Vivian was a natural-born warlock. She was still too young. Soren had no ill feelings towards the mysterious mistress of the caravan, but he was still worried about her. Wizards were all eccentric creatures, and the conflict between rogues and spellcasters was not something that could be resolved in a day or two. None of the native wizards in the storyline were simple characters. The trade caravan continued its journey. Perhaps it was because of the conversation with the mysterious mistress, but the little girl suddenly became interested in learning how to read. Soren also felt that she should learn more words. Not all of the abilities of a warlock were automatically awakened. Unlike dragons, they could not automatically awaken their knowledge. Warlocks needed to learn how to read and write on their own, while dragons could automatically learn a lot of languages and words. Vivian had learned some words from Soren in the past, but the number of words she learned was less than 100. The little girl was actually very smart, and her learning speed was even faster than Soren's. However, she still liked to do things that she liked to do. Sometimes, she would feel sleepy when she looked at things with a lot of words. Sometimes, she would even yawn. The trade caravan slowed down a little today. The little girl still did not like things with a lot of words. After learning a few dozen new words from Soren, she started to feel sleepy. She mumbled a few words to Soren, then giggled and told him that she would learn next time. After that, she started to play with the little things that the others gave her. In just one day, the little girl had become very popular in the trade caravan. Some of the little things were given to her by the trade caravan workers, while some were toys given to her by the mysterious mistress. For example, a set of exquisite tarot cards. Vivian liked things with pictures on them. Half a day passed just like that. They saw some gnolls and gnomes along the way, but none of them had the guts to attack such a large caravan. The caravan didn't stop until there was a commotion in front of them. Soren wanted to earn more slaughter EXP, so he went to take a look as well. But this time, he didn't have the chance to make a move. The caravan met a person. An adventurer traveling alone in the wilderness. It was an ordinary-looking middle-aged man. He had a square face, thick eyebrows, and big eyes. He was dressed in ordinary gray clothes. His arms were wrapped in bandages, and his legs were tied up. His hair was very short, and his neck was much thicker than most people's. This meant that he might have been trained in a special way of fighting, such as the war roar, a special ability that was similar to the lion's roar. When Soren saw him, the merchant guards were talking to him from afar. There were 3 dead gnolls near him, all killed by his bare hands. A fistmaster? Soren looked at the middle-aged man in surprise. He then dismounted from his horse and put his hands together. "Are you traveling alone?" The middle-aged man returned the salute and bowed his head. He looked very humble. The merchant guard saw Soren's actions and relaxed a little. The captain of the guards rode over and whispered, "Who is he?" Someone saw him fighting the gnolls. He killed 3 of them with his bare hands. The other gnolls ran away. Soren nodded and explained, "This should be a fist master. He's a warrior monk. They like to wander alone in the wilderness, looking for opportunities to sharpen their will and strength. This one seems to be an ascetic. A warrior monk? An ascetic? The captain's expression relaxed a little. Most ascetics weren't evil people. A fist master was an advanced profession of a warrior monk. They had completely given up on weapons and were proficient in bare-handed attacks. Only fist masters and holy fist guards could master the powerful ability, one-inch punch. A warrior monk was one of the professions that liked to travel alone in the wilderness because they needed to sharpen their will in the wilderness. At the same time, they could feel the power of emptiness, nirvana, and chaos. If they chose the path of an ascetic, they would also have a special sacred ritual, which was to donate all their wealth to the poor. An ascetic would donate most of their wealth and keep only a small amount of material wealth for themselves to sharpen their will. This was one of the professions with the highest will attribute. They were almost immune to most charm and mind spells. At the same time, because they gave up material wealth, their faith became stronger. Very few people could become ascetics. This was because they had to make a special vow. If they broke it, it could even lead to a flaw in their mind. In other words, it was the so-called self-deception. If a powerful professions were to fall into such a situation, there would be an obvious flaw in their will, and their strength would be greatly affected. Only 1 out of 10 warrior monks would become an ascetic. Only 1 out of 10 ascetics would become an ascetic monk. This was the most difficult profession to advance. Because ascetics would not keep overnight wealth, many of them completely gave up weapons and rare equipment and reached the highest achievement of a fist master. One-inch punch, legendary. They did not use any weapons, did not wear any equipment, and only relied on their strong intuition and hands to fight. This group of people's magic resistance was very exaggerated, and they had some very special abilities. These abilities were gradually comprehended in a long period of cultivation. Many of them relied on their own strong willpower, honed in a difficult environment, and finally directly interfered with the elemental energy of the material world. Many ascetics gave up in the end because not everyone could resist the temptation of material things. Once cultivation was given up, the ascetics became ordinary warrior monks, and they might not have the courage to try again in their lifetime. Soon, the caravan had an additional companion. The fist master seemed to be very quiet and almost did not take the initiative to talk to others. This was not very strange. Some ascetics even pretended to be mute and did not say a word for several years. In the afternoon, he would beg the others in the caravan, just some water and simple food. He refused most meat and only ate coarse black bread. It was not that ascetics did not eat meat. But when they began a period of cultivation, travel, unless it was a special situation, they only ate the simplest and coarsest food. This kind of cultivation could take up to several years, and often, after completing it once, their strength would be significantly improved. At that time, many people tried to cultivate. Unfortunately, they all failed in the end. The players could not bear this kind of life at all. They would rather challenge some powerful monsters and directly use slaughter EXP to level up. Warrior monks were not rare in this world. Their cultivation method had been accepted by more and more people, and even integrated with some of the sword saints' training methods, and finally produced the current weapon master profession. The only difference was that they changed from fighting bare-handed to specializing in a certain weapon. This group of people had strong willpower. Some of the priests would also try to train in a similar way to strengthen the strength of their beliefs. This fist master had no sense of presence. Until evening, he did not take the initiative to say a word to anyone. He just silently followed the caravan. He did not ride a horse, and even rejected the horses that were offered by kind people. He walked all the way, but his walking speed was very fast, and his endurance was much better than ordinary people. It could be said that he walked as if he was flying, and he easily caught up with the caravan. When it was evening, he did not need to rest in a tent, and he did not even need to get close to the bonfire. He just found a stone and sat cross-legged. Then he stopped moving. The second day of the journey could be said to be very peaceful. Other than the appearance of this fist master, there was almost no trouble on the road. When Soren woke up on the third day, the fist master was still sitting on the stone, and the caravan guards nearby were pointing at him with obvious surprise and shock on their faces. Obviously, the warrior training they received was very difficult, but it was not to such an extreme extent. Only the captain of the guards had a thoughtful expression on his face. That was because his training as a northern barbarian was also very extreme. He had to immerse his entire body in ice water that was below 0 degrees Celsius in order to suppress his violent power. At that time, he had almost lost his life. He did not move for the whole night. The next day, the fist master's body was covered with dew, and because of the cold weather, there was a faint white frost on his eyebrows. At this time, the others finally understood why Soren had a trace of respect for him. This was indeed not a training method that ordinary people could endure. In fact, the normal training of a monk was not much different from that of a warrior, but the advanced class of an ascetic was more special. The way they trained themselves was more extreme, and it was completely through the most difficult way to uncover their potential. There was a succubus queen in the abyss. Even many gods couldn't resist her charm magic, but the legendary monk could directly ignore it. One could imagine how strong their willpower was. The fist master left in the afternoon of the third day. This was because Soren and the others were close to a small town, which was close to the city of Whiterun. It would take them at most 2 days to reach there. Ascetics did not go near crowded places when they trained, and they preferred to train in deserted areas. He planned to go to a large waterfall in the northwest and train there for a year to find an opportunity to learn the ethereal body, and pursue the opportunity to become a legendary monk, and finally master the legendary divine transcendence. Until he left. No one knew his name, as if he was just a passerby on their journey. However, for some reason, he gave Vivian a book. It was not a secret martial arts book. There was no such thing as a secret martial arts book in this world. It was just a book called Hand-to-Hand Mastery and One-Inch Punch. Just like the warrior's advanced slashing techniques and finding the enemy's weakness, the wizard's enhancing and flexible use of evocation spells, the priest's the influence of faith on divine spells, and the paladin's the divine power of faith. These books were written by many people, and if one trained according to the methods written in the book, they could learn some additional abilities. For example, the thief's special skills for picking locks. If one carefully read this book, they could improve their picking skills a little, and if they were lucky, they could even learn the ability, lock-picking expert. The book given by the fist master, if one trained according to the methods written in the book and met the training requirements, they could obtain the hand-to-hand mastery ability, and then meet the requirements to become a monk. In the end, they could try to learn the ability, One-Inch Punch. However, how could Soren let Vivian become a monk, which was a difficult profession? The training methods of this profession were too difficult. So he put it away and threw it into his multidimensional bag. Vivian should just be a fair, rich, and beautiful sorcerer. Besides, he could not let the little girl train alone in the wilderness. He could not bear to let her suffer. Chapter 40. In the afternoon, the caravan arrived at their new destination. It was a small town called Gold Creek Town. The town was prosperous for a while because there was a river where gold could be found there. Unfortunately, the town gradually declined after the gold mine was completely mined. Before the caravan even got close to the town, the alarm bell rang. Immediately after, some people rode over to check. This was still considered a border area of the wilderness, so the people living here were very alert. After confirming that it was a caravan, the people in the town let them pass. At the same time, some people came over to ask about the goods. In places far away from the city, some people would sell their goods to the caravan at a low price, and the caravan would bring them to the city to sell. At the same time, they would also buy some things from the merchants and sell them in the nearby towns. Unless they had a large number of guards like this caravan from the north, ordinary merchants would not trade long distances. This was because it was more dangerous and troublesome to travel. The little girl was in a good mood today. Perhaps it was because the journey was relatively peaceful. She jumped off the horse as soon as they arrived at the town and looked around curiously. The captain of the guards told Soren that he would be staying in the town for the night. He could look around as he pleased and go to the inn at the east gate at night. The whole town was surrounded by a wall. The wall was built with 2 layers of sturdy logs. Each log was about 20 centimeters thick, and the 2 ends were sharpened and sunk into the ground. There was a watchtower every 100 meters or so, and one could climb up using ladders from below. There were 2 gates in the east and west of the town. Both of them were very thick and heavy, and it looked like a sturdy fortress. This was to guard against attacks from gnolls and possible bandits. But in a town like this, there was always someone on guard at night because gnolls could sneak in. "Brother, look." The little girl held Soren's hand and looked around. When she heard the shouts, she pulled him over curiously. There were 2 people training. One was a middle-aged man, and the other was a younger man. They looked similar, so they were either father and son, or uncle and nephew. "Watch your right side." The middle-aged man with a wooden shield and a wooden sword said in a low voice, "When the enemy attacks from this direction, you have to learn how to use your shield. Watch carefully. When you block, make sure your arms are at a certain distance. Only then will you have room to move. When you use your shield, don't take too big a step. What is truly fatal is the sword in your hand, not this shield. What you need to do is to use the impact of the shield to make the opponent lose his balance, and then stab with your weapon." The 2 of them were training seriously. The middle-aged man didn't look back at all, but the young man was slightly distracted. Then, the middle-aged man smashed him to the ground with his shield. "This is the second thing I want to tell you. You can't be distracted in battle. Continue training." The young man gritted his teeth and got up. His expression was much more serious. At the same time, he launched a more valiant attack. Maybe it was because someone was looking at him, which aroused his competitive spirit. The middle-aged man was still calm and unhurried. While blocking, he said in a deep voice, "Look carefully. Facing the enemy's hacking attacks. Shields are not the only means of defense. You also need to learn how to use weapons to parry. Cleave attacks align. At this time, if you can't dodge, you need to think of a way to block the enemy's attack." Just like that. The middle-aged man swung his sword to parry, then rushed forward and knocked the young man to the ground with his shoulder. Swords aren't the only things that can defeat the enemy. Our bodies are also a kind of weapon. Stand up. It was a very realistic and merciless training method. Soren looked at the blood coming out of the young man's nose. His expression gradually became serious, and he carefully observed them. The middle-aged man looked at them. However, he didn't pay much attention to them. After twirling the wooden sword in his hand, he continued, "If the enemy stabs at you, at this time, it's best not to parry. You need to learn how to use your body to dodge. Stabs attack a point, so it's very difficult to parry. However, as long as you move your body, you can easily avoid the attack. However, when the enemy stabs at you, it's often just the beginning of the attack. You need to learn how to judge in an instant. Pay attention to their shoulders. Any attack has a trajectory. When they need to explode with power, their body will inevitably make corresponding movements. For example, you can do this." The middle-aged man dodged the sword, then twisted his waist and took a step forward to swing his sword at the young man's wrist. The wooden sword fell to the ground with a clang. The young man who had been defeated consecutively was finally discouraged. He lay on the ground, panting. He didn't even pick up the sword. The middle-aged man looked at the sky and slowly said, "Today's training ends here. If you want to become a qualified warrior, you still have a lot to learn. Just relying on brute strength to fight is just courting death." The middle-aged man wiped his sweat with the clothes on the side, then glanced at Soren and the scimitar on his body. He said seriously, "Outsider. I'm the captain of the militia here. Although this place doesn't exclude outsiders, it's not welcoming either. You better not cause any trouble." Threat. The middle-aged man's tone was very serious, and there was no provocation in his expression. It was as if he was talking about something very normal, but it inexplicably gave people a sense of pressure. I never like to cause trouble. Soren smiled and said calmly, but if someone provokes me, I'll make them regret it. We're just passing by. The middle-aged man nodded. That's for the best. This was a third-grade warrior, and it was very likely that he used to be a famous adventurer. Soren noticed that his legs were a little inconvenient. Perhaps he had suffered a serious injury that caused his bones to deviate. Adventurers like this were quite common. Many had to retire after being injured and return to their hometown to live a normal life. There were many people in this world with stories. Big brother. The little girl picked up a branch and gestured. That man just now looked quite strong. But the people he taught are so stupid. They can't even remember such simple things. Look. Soren looked at the little girl's crooked posture. She was small and weak, and even her posture was a little off. But Soren didn't discourage her. He rubbed her little head and said, "It's quite simple. But they're all very practical skills. Of course, he's not as smart as my Vivian. Let's go. I'll take you to buy some good food." When Soren was watching the man train, a row of small words appeared in front of his eyes. Skill level up. You've learned something while watching others train. You've grasped a certain combat skill. Parry +1, block +1, evasion, movement, +1. Soren didn't expect to unlock 2 new basic skills just like that. He thought that he would have to wait until he started training on parrying and blocking in the future before he could unlock these 2 basic skills. 1 or 2 points in a basic skill weren't very useful. If he wanted to gain a significant increase, he would need to gain at least 10 points. Normally, a basic skill would gain a significant increase of around 50 points. For example, a shield warrior's 100 points of block. That was the level of a professional who could use a shield to block, just like Soren's ability in stealth. A basic skill was chosen to specialize in a certain direction. Then, the other basic skills that were triggered would automatically level up over time. The skill points gained from leveling up would rarely be invested into these skills, because there were specializations in different professions. Most of the basic skills that were related to professions would be leveled up faster. For example, Soren's evasion was already at 6 points, and he hadn't gone through any specialized training. If he trained in evasion, rolling, and evasion, movement, his evasion could quickly reach 20 points or more. Normally, a basic evasion skill of around 50 points could passively increase one's evasion by 1 point. This evasion was an instinctive evasion. It was an instinctive reaction when a person was attacked. Only certain specializations could increase this. For example, intuitive evasion, evasion proficiency, super evasion, and so on. These were all combat specializations that were very difficult to obtain through training, and their effects were also very obvious. Basic skills were relatively normal abilities. Only specializations were skills that could significantly increase one's strength. Of course, the difficulty of mastering them was also very high. Some specializations had prerequisites for basic skills. For example, the combat specialization, defense and offense, 100 points of parry, and the combat specialization, powerful shield bash, 150 points of parry, all of which required mastery of basic skills. Basic skills below 50 points were relatively easy to master, but to level them up, one would need to be a professional. For example, the negotiation and valuation skills of a professional businessman. And the taunting ability of a barbarian. Sometimes, when you meet these simple-minded and muscular guys, you would really be angered by their words. These were a group of taunting professionals. One of the favorite things of the player barbarian was to show off his muscles in front of his enemies and taunt them, a bunch of weaklings. Also, the taunting ability of the witches with poisonous tongues was also very strong. There were some players who had a low profession level, only LV6, because of their poisonous tongues, but their taunting ability was actually over 200 points, master level. Once they used their poisonous tongues, they would instantly become the target of everyone. Too much taunting would create an aura. Even if they didn't understand what you were saying, their expressions would be filled with hatred. You're tuning into the Dreamy Love Stories YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.